for a couple of reasons this evening. First order of business is a special called session of the Athens-Clarke County Mayor and Commission just to consider a single item, and that will be followed by our regularly scheduled work session, which we always have on the second Tuesday of the month, and we have 3 items for consideration there. We, at a special called session, do need to call roll, so I'm going to just turn it over to Clerk Spratlin so she can call roll for us.
Davenport.
Here.
Parker.
Here.
Link.
Here.
Wright.
Present.
Denson.
Here.
Spruill.
Here.
Edwards.
Here.
Myers.
Here.
Thornton.
Here.
Hamby.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. I appreciate that very much. We are here to consider the judiciary request for American Rescue Plan Act funds for the state of Georgia's Administrative Office of the Courts program. And we are fortunate we have with us Elisa Zarate, who is the court administrator, and we have with us Chief Superior Court Judge Eric Norris. And we've, of course, seen an evolving set of needs emerge in the courts, really over the last 2 years. And as this funding source from the state has become available, I know Elisa and Judge Norris, you've looked at the range of opportunities on the public sector and judiciary side. And I did want to provide you opportunity now to talk to commissioners and the public a little bit about the nature of these requests so they can understand those pieces that you're looking to bolster with these funds that are flowing through the state.
All right. Well, if I want to go ahead and lead off. So the money that was allocated to the state of Georgia, the governor carved out approximately $110 million of those funds to be used to assist the judiciary. Of that $110 million, $14 million is carved out specifically for the public defenders for the state because they fall under more of the executive branch versus the judicial branch. The remaining $96 million is to be funded throughout 3 years. We learned about this in late October, early November. There was an application time in November. We chose not to make an application at that time so we could bring all the stakeholders in and have some discussion. We put pen to paper, their prospective needs would be before we make an application or consider making an application. It's been a moving target a little bit because there are some very unique rules that apply to the judiciary, and we're limited in some of the uses that we can make for the application and implementation of the funds, whereas counties that receive ARPA funds are going to have much broader discretion in how those funds are used. So we're under some very strict rules, and so we're trying to make sure we comply with those in any request. Suffice it to say, I met with everybody December 22nd. I called all the leadership between the 2 counties that comprise the circuit, asked them to go ahead and submit what they believe would be necessary to help us. The intent of the Supreme Court Justice Namias is to address the backlog of serious violent felonies that are in the courts that have been delayed because of the pandemic and having the resumption of jury trials. And you can look at that as sort of a flow down because it's not just confined to Superior Court. There's like an octopus, there's a lot of tentacles that go out and touch other aspects of the courts to include the clerk of courts, the sheriff's office, probation office, things of that nature, because they're all intertwined in some form or fashion. So with that in mind, we had a submit date set for January 10th. The way this process works, only the chief judge can make an application for these funds. But of course, I saw input from all the different entities that would potentially be affected by this request. We have that, and I know that Ms. Zarate has copied, I believe, as part of this presentation, the specific breakdown between the different offices and courts as to what they're seeking. Just some high points. A lot of this is going to come down to personnel, and these would be temporary hires, and think of it as a contract employee on a year-by-year basis. If they're hired on a year-by-year basis, every year we have to renew and request. The Justice Nomius has really put an emphasis on the first year. So they're out of that $96 million, I think they're trying to allocate $40 to $50 million the first year, so that by the time we get to the third year, we work through the backlog. And so it's sort of a descending order of monies that are being applied throughout the state. And we've got 50 judicial circuits, and each one has a different unique need. So the list that's before you shows the breakdown of what's being asked by each office. And, you know, it is a wish list. Obviously, once we submit that, the review committee will go through it. They'll determine if it's appropriate, whether the amounts are appropriate, and they'll come back and make a decision as to what would be awarded to the circuit. And then if it's less than what we asked for, we'd have to apportion that out among the other entities in a somewhat of a pro rata basis to make sure the funds are applied evenly as much as possible based on their original request. But the goal is to get cases that are serious that might be holding up other matters. And so I will say I'm very proud that over the last almost 2 years now, since we went into the pandemic, you know, the courts have been open the entire time, although we had to suspend jury trials and grand jury for almost a year and a half, actually a year. Once we were able to open back up in March of 2020, we were able to go ahead and start doing the grand jury, holding jury trials, and with the assistance of both Clarke and Oconee counties having alternate sites that we could utilize for conducting trials in a safe manner with all the COVID protocols. We were one of the first circuits to actually be able to start doing that, and we've been consistent in making sure that people have access to the courts and to trials, and to make sure that we're working through that. So with that in mind, you know, we have trial weeks at least every month, all four of us on the Superior Court side, and of course state court is doing the same thing. What we anticipate is the needs would show based on cases that either have not been indicted yet or accused. And I know with the chief here, we know cases are coming in. They're going to continue to come in. And so the aspect of requests that are made by the various offices is to address those cases that are pending that have to be reviewed for prosecutorial insight and discretion as to what is being prosecuted, and then what is presented to the grand jury, and then what is accused. So I think you'll see a large part of that is coming from the different agencies, either the DA's office, the clerk's office, because obviously if we have cases that are being reviewed and the need for additional personnel, that increases the need from the clerk. That brings into the aspect of potentially having senior Superior Court judges come in and hold sessions while we do matters that would pertain to the serious violent felonies, which goes to the request of potentially utilizing the Classic Center again to ensure that we can run multiple courts as needed. It is a reimbursement plan, so once we get the award, we'll find out in March, I believe it is, if there are hires or expenditures. The way it's set up is the county would pay that, but then the reimbursement would come through the administrative office of courts, so that money is going to be, it's a zero net. It's going to go in, it'll come back. The one thing we can't determine, obviously, is, a lot of this is personnel heavy, which means you got to hire people. And then once you hire them, then you have to pay them. So it's a lot like an accordion. We're making educated guesses on what the needs are. And then once we have the hires, that money would be utilized for those expenditures, whether it be office space, their computers, equipment that we can use, personnel, things of that nature. For Mr. Donnelly, obviously the $14 million is on a separate track through the executive side, and Obviously, what we don't want to have is an imbalance between one side of the coin or the other, between the prosecution and the defense. And we recognize funding is disproportionate in many ways, the way it's been set up. However, I know I sent Mayor Gertz and the chairman of Oconee and then Mr. Williams, Manager Williams, is that the Justice Namias has also requested that we seek help from the counties, from the ARPA funds the counties will receive, to maybe balance out where what we're restricted in doing, the counties might be able to assist on those matters where you have a lot more discretion. So obviously, if we have an additional prosecution team that comes in, then that would also necessitate additional resources for the public defenders. And so whether that allocation through their $14 million would be sufficient or not, we don't know yet, but that might be something that we would come to the county and say, they can only get this much in their allocation, but they would have a need of one or two more people. Would the county be willing to help either both Athens and Oconee through the ARPA funds that are going to be distributed to the counties coming forward? But that's it in a nutshell. I'm open to answering any questions that you may have. This is a pretty quick situation where, I mean, really in October, it's like this money is getting allocated. Y'all need to come up with a plan. Here's how it is. And I think where we stand right now, we're right at about 1.7 million. The first round of applications that were applied for in November, the Judicial Council and the Supreme Court, it turns out, have kind of put it at $2 million per circuit is what we honestly could look at during this first funding round. So we're below that. And I think we're trying to be conservative on what we're asking for, but also trying to meet the needs as we can project them. And then depending on how that works, there would be another application period that we can request additional funding in the latter part of the year. And then when we get to the end of the year, I think by November, December of this year, there'll be opportunities to make requests for fiscal year 2023. So with that in mind, I'm open to answering any questions. Of course, Mrs. Rate is here, and then TJ Bement, who's our 10th district administrator, would be able to give you some more input too.
Great. I appreciate that, Judge Norris. And
yes, sir.
At least in our draft of ARPA expenditures, we've left a reserve amount, recognizing there may be some as yet unknown needs that we want to be able to fulfill. So hopefully the public defender can come to us if the state allocation isn't sufficient, really, to provide parity. Obviously, in a courtroom, you can't have only a prosecutor at the table if you don't have a defense attorney as well. So are there any other details, either Lisa or TJ, that you'd like to add before I open it up to any questions that commissioners have?
We're here for any questions. We can fill you in any more background if needed.
Great. Thanks, y'all, for being here. Any questions from commissioners? Got Commissioner Myers.
No, this all sounds great, and I think it's really important to address that backlog. So I'm happy that you guys are, submitting this, and hopefully you'll get as much funding as you can. Just in terms of that, anticipating the needs of the public defender, I assume when you guys went through this and made this personnel, you were sort of looking at how many cases could be covered during the calendar. You must have plotted out some schedule for yourselves to figure out how this added staff would be able to work with these cases. And so I was wondering if you have or if you had or could or would help to share that calendar planning with the public defender's office so that they can better anticipate their needs, and therefore we can sort of work better with them to make sure they're as funded as they need to be.
Sure. So we actually have a term calendar that's set a year in advance. And for each judge, at least on the Superior Court and then on the state court side, We plan out X number of trials per year for each county. Typically in Athens, we have anywhere from 10 to 11 criminal jury trials per year, and then somewhere between 4 civil trials per year. And then for Oconee County, we typically have somewhere between 4 criminal jury trial weeks and about 3 or 4 civil trial weeks. So the counterbalance of all this is the priority is to tackle the serious violent felonies and the backlogs that exist on the criminal side. But at the same time, we have to make sure that we're covering our civil cases too. And roughly 50% of what we do is criminal and the other 50% is civil. So with that in mind is where we have the senior judges come in. We have additional resources for them that could utilize additional space at the Classic Center so that we could run multiple trials, whether it be a civil case or a criminal case. But with the Public Defender's Office, obviously, they're part of that term calendar also. So they're aware in advance of what the calendars are going to look like. If we get to a place that we have to add additional criminal trial calendars to assist with this backlog, Mr. Donnelly and I have talked in a recent meeting with all the different players on this, is that obviously if he's going to have more trials, we understand he's going to have more people. So we're not going to put him in a position of scheduling cases when he doesn't have personnel, because that's really we just couldn't do that, and it would be unfair to them. I think the biggest struggle, and this is sort of an unknown, with all 50 different circuits seeking the funds and then making hires, and these are temporary positions. So, attorneys are going to have to want to come and work on a contract basis for a year. Now, you can pay with the ARPA funds market rate, which, having gone through our national championship last night, there's going to be a lot of recruiting going on, I think, across the state for talent and for people who want to come to different areas. And, of course, pay is going to be one of them, location, and then making those decisions. So I think both the public defender and the district attorney are going to have to work through what might become a bidding war somewhat with different circuits. And quite honestly, there is not a lot of, and Mr. Donnelly, you'll be able to chime in here if you wish, district attorney offices across the state and, of course, the public defender's offices have a somewhat of a dearth of applicants who are wanting to practice in these fields. And so it's one, having people who want to go into the prosecution or defense side of the court system. And then once you have that, hiring them on, getting them trained, taking experienced folks, because obviously Justice Namias was somewhat emphatic, is that you want your top, most experienced prosecutors doing the very heavy, serious cases. And then you prioritize and triage the rest throughout the office. So I think there's a challenge. We don't know exactly what that looks like yet. But I do know that, as much as I have the ability to ensure that both offices have the funding that they need, but also if one is going to be short, they're not going to be penalized because they don't have the personnel at that time. We can always flex through anything. The last 2 years have taught us how to adapt and overcome some of these very serious situations.
Thanks, Judge. Got questions on tap from Commissioners Houle and Commissioner Thornton.
Thanks, Mayor. I had arrived here kind of with the question of what happens if one side, if you will, if this grant gets fully funded and the public defenders don't. So I'm glad that we're talking about this. I have some concerns about us continually seeing the local ARPA funds as a place to dip into to make up gaps everywhere. I hear that getting referenced a lot in our conversations, so I want to caution against thinking that bucket is bigger than it is. But I guess I'd be curious to hear Mr. Donnelly's take on this. One of the concerns I have is that the application process being different also might preclude people being hired in the same fashion, like how the technicalities around who can be a contractor and whatnot works. And so I guess I'm just curious, based on some conversations I've had and heard before this, if that's a realistic outcome, that we can expect that the public defenders are just going to not be able to get anywhere near the funding. And for us to move forward with this, we should be anticipating needing to find a way to make up the gap instead of it being a possibility, more like a likelihood, I guess.
John, do you have some thoughts thus far, kind of knowing what you know about what's going on with the statewide process?
I have plenty of thoughts. I don't know. Let's see. I'll try to organize them. I liked that question from Commissioner Myers about whether anyone has come up with a sort of more specific list of cases that would, maybe I'm interpreting your question, but as far as having some sort of specific plan with a list of cases and scheduling, I haven't seen anything like that. I would love to see that. I'm not aware that anything like that has been prepared. If, to answer Commissioner Poole's point, or to address his point that he just raised, if this application goes through as requested, no, we will not be able to come anywhere close to meeting the need in the courtrooms. The DA's office is asking for 4 attorney positions and 4 support staff, and then about, I think, $60,000 in other money. We have been told that we would be authorized to hire 1 attorney, 0 support staff, with the money that has been allocated to the state public defender system. And with the conditions that they placed on that money, I'm not confident that I could even hire that 1 person. As Judge Norris said, there is a historically low pool of applicants right now for assistant public defenders, and from what I can tell, for assistant prosecutors. I don't know why, but that's the situation. So obviously, yeah, everyone I think has touched on the concern. You know, you can't play tennis with just 1 participant and a chair umpire. You need someone on the other side. And if they're going to build more courts and get more players on the other team, we would need.
So, John, just following up on that, and then I'll get to a couple other questions. So, kind of drilling in on sort of the ratio of what you typically have in terms of district attorney, ADAs to public defenders. You know, would you anticipate the need at sort of a 1-to-1 ratio? So, if there were 4 new ADAs, you would.
I mean, I don't know if they're going to use the staff to do something that doesn't require our involvement. For example, you know, if they're presiding over the grand jury presentations or filing accusations, that's stuff that's done in their office that doesn't involve our participation in court necessarily. But it looks like, just from the grant application, that the copy that we were provided with, also because Judge Norris is asking for, or TJ or whoever is asking for, additional senior judges to come in and to rent space at the Classic Center. So it sounds like the plan is to have, and that's my understanding, that they're wanting to make the possibility of additional courtrooms with additional judges and additional prosecutors. And I know that no one is trying to leave us out intentionally. They've just been told, hey, the GPDC is a state executive branch agency, so this pool of money is just for the county court systems, not for the public defender agency. I mean, I know that's not intentional here locally, but the effect is, I'm afraid, that we would be not able to meet the workload. But
I'm trying to think in very rough numbers and anticipate that, should you need 4 additional staff positions, and, let's just say in kind of round numbers, we would allocate $300,000 a year for 4 new staff positions, and we would project ahead over 3 years. We're talking about $900,000. So that is sort of how I have very loosely, at least, contemplated sort of what that opportunity for parity would look like.
Yeah, and let me just add, like the senior judges we would anticipate would be handling, because jury trial for criminal matters, senior judges would be able to come in and be utilized for other civil or TPOs or other matters. I mean, all within balance. But I do know when I was on the call this past Friday with Justice Namias and other chiefs, I know that he had spoken with, I guess, the leadership with ACCG, and had really, I think there had been some question about judiciary ARPA funds, county ARPA funds. So I know that they've had a discussion about, how that might flow into different requests from the judiciary that would fill in some gaps potentially, which obviously the most pressing one would be is if we had the funding and the hires through our request, but Mr. Donnelly's office was woefully not funded, one, could we come and ask the counties to make an allocation of their ARPA funds to help that? But then also we would always, there's good communication, I think, between the courts and the public defender and district attorney's offices. We know we can only have so many trials and you have to have attorneys. So it's a 3-year process. The first year is going to be a sort of like when we started the pandemic. What do we do? How does it look like? And how does it work? I personally think by the time if we get the funding and the go-ahead to start in March, you really won't see anything start gearing up until probably 3 to 5 months after that. And that's when we would see what would happen and how the flow of cases and quite honestly, what cases are going to get resolved or that would actually go to trial. So luckily, most cases in the sense of criminal cases do get resolved without trial, and that's for various different reasons. But there are going to be some cases that trials are just absolutely necessary because the risk is high for both sides.
Sounds like would definitely be back at the table with some potential future needs. And I think I can speak for the body when we say we're kind of very open to understanding just the nature of those needs. And we want to hear about those as they emerge. And we want to make sure that the public defender is as well staffed as necessary to provide for the public defense. I had a couple other folks. I think I had yet to get to Commissioner Thornton and then Commissioner Handy. Commissioner Thornton, I think you're still muted.
Sorry. Thank you, Mayor. I think Mr. Donnelly really kind of answered my question. And I guess my concern is this money is supposed to help us get kind of caught up in the court with some of the cases. And I think I heard you, Judge Norris, say that if necessary, the courts could, like, I guess, work with Mr. Donnelly's office and, put a hold, may not require as much if they don't have the staffing. But my concern becomes if there's a hole in that department, then there's going to be an overflow later on. Does that make sense to me? It seems like with the problem you're trying to resolve could create another problem later on down the line. I would now, maybe I'm just maybe I overlooked it, but I think the mayor was trying to get to what would the public defender's office need? What does that wish list look like? And I don't know if I've heard it. I think Mr. Donnelly articulated the concerns, but at the bottom line, what is it that we can make sure that business flows just as well in the in his area as well as the DA's office or whatever. What does that dollar amount look like?
So I would tell you that, and John, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't know if y'all would be able to hire temporary contract. Haven't seen that part specifically laid out on your funding, but essentially, if we get approved on our request through the commission, the Judicial Council, and if the district attorney's office actually hired and were able to hire X number of people, it may fall. I mean, they may get everybody they want and they're able to hire it exactly as they're requested. But if they're not able to achieve or reach the hiring capacity that they've asked for, obviously parity would be important for Mr. Donnelly's office. And if the GPDC was only able to fund one position, but let's say there was 2 or 3 more positions, that would probably necessitate us coming to you as a commission and also to Oconee County saying, here's the gap, here's what we need to make up for it funding wise. But then of course, the one thing that Mr. Donnelly, myself, and Ms. Gonzalez don't control is people who are going to apply and who will take a job. So that is really the unknown. Is we might get funded for all these positions and maybe everybody will apply, or maybe you're only able to hire just 50% of that because the applicants are not choosing to go into this line of work. That's really where we don't know. And that's why I think it is fluid, so that there can be other times during the course of the year when we see how this progresses that we might find that we can come back again through different avenues and ask for additional funding if we need it. We might find that there's money that's carried over to the following year that we were not able to extend if we were awarded the full amount that we requested. So I wish I could be more concrete on that, but it is a very fluid process.
Mayor, may I ask Mr. Donnelly a part 2? Mr. Donnelly, do you have a dollar amount in your mind that would help you through the same crisis that the DA is district attorney offices are trying to deal with? Is there a dollar amount that just pops off the top of your head if you had a wish list?
No, I don't have a dollar amount. And partly because we're not really experiencing a crisis.
Okay.
This, if it would be reactive to whatever extra work is created in the court. So it depends on the funding.
Okay. Okay, that's helpful for me.
And maybe I can help just kind of clarify that a little bit. And so we did meet about December 22nd. Right now, the trial courts are not backlogged in the sense of cases. We are on track. I mean, we're where we need to be, and everybody knows what cases. And as Ms. Gonzalez told us during that meeting, the backlog is new cases that are coming in, analyzing those cases, determining what steps would be taken from an arrest point up to an accusation being filed or a grand jury indictment. Because quite honestly, once arrest happens, other than a bond hearing, there's not a lot of movement. The biggest time that the surge comes is when cases become accused or indicted. That's when Mr. Donnelly's office suddenly sees, hey, we've got 50 new cases right now, or 60 new cases. And as we know, it's like an accordion. What comes in has to be looked at, fleshed through, decided upon, and then once it hits the accusation indictment stage, that's where really the trial courts, the public defender, and the district attorney's office is having to work through the numbers that come through. So it's predicting what that's going to look like. Obviously, you've got the numbers from Ms. Gonzalez, cases, serious violent cases, felonies that are pending for each county. And that's going to change every day.
Thanks, Judge. Mike,
Thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Sure. Mayor, did you call on me? I'm sorry.
yeah, I did. Yeah.
Sorry, that flew off the table. I do support the request tonight that Judge Norris and the courts are asking for, but at the same time, perhaps we could ask Mr. Donnelly to put together a proposal that we'll consider for our February March cycle, so it gets in line with when perhaps this grant's awarded to the courts. And Mr. Donnelly, maybe just go ahead and anticipate being on par with the DA's office. I'm sure over the next 3 years, you're going to need some extra staff and support staff, and go ahead and put that in there and we can go ahead and decide that so that you can plan your operations and plan your hiring the way you need to, so that when the demand is there over the next 3 years, you have the resources available to you to meet that demand. And just let's go ahead and get the question answered, and so that you don't have to worry about it and go from there. So that's what I would suggest. Let's adopt the plan tonight from the courts. Ask Mr. Donnelly and Mayor, maybe you can put something on the agenda for February March cycle that we can vote on. That gives everybody enough time to figure out how much is needed.
Yeah, definitely be interested in Mr. Donnelly engaging with other players in the court and sort of assembling that staged plan just to make sure that he's got all the resources necessary. I've got Tim, and then unless anyone new is on tap, I'll circle back to Carol and Jesse. Go ahead, Tim.
Hey, Mayor. I just wanted to dig into a couple of the answers that Judge Norris and Mr. Donnelly just kind of brought up there, that this isn't really addressing a backlog, but more so trying to address the new wave that's coming in. I guess that's just now that's coming into me a little bit new after reading the agenda item, which definitely refers to this as a backlog over and over and over again. It has kind of been referred to us during this agenda cycle as a backlog. So I'm trying to get more clarification on what this is going to be addressed. If it's not a backlog, but it's more of the oncoming cases. Yeah, just some clarification.
Yeah, I mean, it's a backlog in the sense of, if you take a criminal case from the very beginning of an arrest all the way through the process, if you look at the numbers right now, those total numbers, let's just say every case that was made is an accurate case and that would be prosecuted in some form or fashion. Once it hits the gate of accusation or indictment, it then becomes something that Mr. Donnelly's office, Ms. Gonzalez's office is prosecuting, defending, or either trying. Because we had been in the pandemic and we had suspended jury trials and grand jury for a good year or so, obviously a lot of cases that came in somewhat became stagnant. And it wasn't until we opened up the courts for trying cases that we could take those cases that were already pre-existing, accused, indicted, and start trying those older cases as we move to the newer cases. Where I think most of the Superior Court judges are, and the attorneys that have cases that have been indicted or accused, we're running through, we're getting those cases resolved one way or the other. What we don't control is, once a case is, a person is arrested, is whether it's indicted, whether it's accused, when it's indicted, when it's accused. That process is outside of my control or Mr. Donnelly's. But if you take the number of cases that are pending based on Ms. Gonzalez's information, those have to be worked in some manner to determine whether it will or will not be prosecuted. If it's not prosecuted, why? And they have to make those discretionary calls, whether it's a lack of evidence, unable to prosecute it successfully, victims don't want the case to be prosecuted. Those take people to make that decision. And then if the case is, in fact, indicted or accused, then that becomes a case that Mr. Donnelly, myself, and the district attorney's office have to resolve in one way or the other, whether it be a plea negotiation or a trial. So it is anticipatory in the sense of what's coming down the pipeline. And that's why the funding is there, but it's not like we get this money, $1.7 million. It's only based on reimbursement. So if we get approved for the full amount, it's only going to come out as we utilize it. So again, that's why I say it's somewhat of a fluid situation, because there are different stopgaps or hurdles or gates, you might call them, as we go through the process from arrest all the way up to a trial. I hope that helps.
I think so. I guess what the part I'm stuck on still is, so are we saying that the presumptive amount coming through is somehow higher than normal, and that's why this new funding is needed? Or that the capacity for you're saying the capacity for the new stuff, that there is a backlog, and therefore the capacity for the new stuff is less?
That's right. So there's 1,000+ felonies yet to be indicted. And that's going to take people to do that. And so if you have, I'll put it back in, in the past, you would typically see grand jury running 1 day a week in Athens, and you could see anywhere between 15, 20 cases being indicted. And again, this is all based on how an office decides to action or look at the cases and make decisions about cases. And that's before me. It's before we ever get our hands on the case. So a lot of this is going to be call it the triage, the emergency room. It's what do we do with the case now that we have it? We have to do something with it because there has been an arrest and a charge made. There has to be some decision made, and it's got to be made after people have made informed decisions based on looking at the evidence. Whether that means an indictment or accusation comes, that's really more discretionary in the sense of what the district attorney's office is.
Okay. I guess I have just one more point that I'm a little concerned with. If we're talking about just trying to find some parity and give funding to the DA's office, my understanding is of what we're doing here tonight is that Athens-Clarke County is the lead county for grant administration purposes. And so this grant, though, is actually for funding in Clarke County, but also in Oconee County. And if we're trying to get parity, I understand that we could be paying funds to help out in Athens-Clarke County to make some of that parity, but then we're also probably going to need funds in Oconee County or something to make parity. Or are we going to talk about we're going to pay funding for Oconee County cases? Because this grant is for both counties. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So the ARPA funds that are through the judiciary applies to both counties. Although I'll tell you, Oconee County, the magistrate probate courts that are specific to Oconee County have not asked for any ARPA funds. The juvenile court, which is circuit-wide, and then, of course, the clerk's office here, all those monies are primarily Clarke County sensitive. If we get to the point for Mr. Donnelly, when there's a need for parity, if it comes in whatever funding fashion that looks like, then, of course, I could go to both the Clarke County Commission and to the Oconee County Commission, and that's why I wrote Mr. Williams and the mayor and Chairman Daniel saying, I don't have a specific need at this time, but based on Justice Namias speaking with ACCG and explaining how that the monies that the counties receive can be and should be considered for judicial purposes, not specific, but it can fill some of those gaps. And so that opens the door that, if Mr. Donnelly needs some help from Clarke County, then we're going to also go to Oconee County and not just seek it specifically from one county. But yes, I've asked that Clarke County be designated as the receiving county for the accounting purposes, because I think it just makes more sense with how HR works in our finance department and how we've been able to work in that sense over the last decades.
Thank you.
All right. I know Russell had a question, and then I'll circle back to Carol and Jesse.
Thanks. I think having District Attorney Gonzalez present during this meeting would probably help clarify a lot of what we're talking about. So maybe she can come to the next one. Thanks.
Certainly. And I'd just remind everybody, as the judge presented at the outset, this is a request for funds, but this is not allocation of those funds, because the state will be allocating those funds. So at least one necessary step is going to have to be the state's response to the application. So go ahead, Carol.
Hey, Commissioner. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I actually, this is a follow. My question, actually, it was a question and a clarification. Really is a follow-up to Commissioner Jensen's now that I was going to ask Judge Norris about. But I think something finally clicked for me here and tied this all in with a discussion I actually had with District Attorney Gonzalez yesterday, where she shared with me a charging checklist that I just printed out that includes lots and lots of steps of tasks and analysis that has to be done by the district's attorney's office that is not parallel to what has to do at the public defender's office. And that's something that I didn't understand as well. And so the parity would not be exactly the same because of these additional tasks, at least from my understanding now. But I will share that list with the rest of the commission. I understand it better. So thank you, Judge Norris, for your explanations as well.
Thanks, Carol. Jesse?
Sure.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, I guess I have a couple thoughts, but before that, I just have one more question, which is, what are the ramifications of delaying a vote on this today?
So
like, do we need to vote today for this to be a thing at all, or?
Well, maybe I can't answer that part since I'm not on the commission, but, and TJ, you might have to step in. If we do not make this request by January 15th, then we will not have another opportunity to make a request, I think, until what, August or so?
It would be late spring for funds to be available starting in the summer.
Basically, I mean, but we have an application now which would be, if approved, then March would be the earliest that we could seek reimbursement. But if we did not apply for by the January 15th deadline, then we would have another application process sometime late spring, which would probably be by the end of summer if approval were granted. So, and let me just say this, Justice Namias and Justice Boggs were very clear that no one gets penalized for not applying or applying at different cycles. But at the same time, we know what's coming, and so we try to be somewhat proactive and preemptive in the sense of, if we know we're going to have a need, if we ask for it now, March would be the first time we would be able to get funding, and then you start chipping away at the ice block, which we know is not going to happen within the first year. It won't be completed, but it gets us moving, on that iceberg that's coming down the road.
Okay.
Well,
Thank you for that.
if there's questions around, the parity of the public defender, I mean, these funds that are being proposed to be applied for with a deadline in a few days, by the state's own requirements, are not eligible for public defender funding. So we can continue that discussion about the parity of it. But from Judge Norris's point, to try and begin to address this considerable backlog that the courts have, quantified, we would need to submit this in time for the deadline.
Yeah, I guess what I'm sitting with is, I'm sitting in the discomfort of what feels like we might be painting ourselves into a corner here, where we apply for these funds, and if we get them, then we've got to find a way to create parity after the fact. And it sounds like that's going to be a lot more challenging. There isn't an easily accessible bucket of state money to give us that. And we keep referring to our ARPA allocation, but without clear definition of what the backlog is or what constitutes eliminating the backlog, I worry that we may be opening a can of worms there. And then also, I have concerns that we might be painting defendants into a corner by creating a situation where there's staffing there to, I guess, create pressure for expeditious outcomes where clients may not have the opportunity to get the kind of defense counsel they would benefit from to avoid things like plea bargains. So when we talk about, it's not just about trials. I think it's about the situations people can end up in where they avoid trial by, taking a guilty plea that ultimately isn't maybe in their best interest. There's just not the resources there. And thinking about how that's a phenomenon that already exists for people, I'm worried about this exacerbating it. So that's kind of what I'm sitting with right now, I guess.
What I believe benefits us is that we have allocated a set aside with some of our ARPA funds, so we know that there's a pool of available local funds. Obviously, we have high interest in ensuring that the complete system is at play, and it appears that it will be some months before prosecutorial or judicial activity would even be initiated with these funds. So I don't worry about having to say jump on Monday morning coming up.
And if I could add, Michelle, so, it's sort of interesting with, let's say I have 10 trial weeks in Clarke County that are criminal specific. If you have a serious violent felony, you're going to only be able to try that case that week. And so right now where we stand, it's sort of an interesting part. The accordion is actually squeezed like this. So right now, this past Monday, I canceled it because of Omicron. I was supposed to have 6 people on my arraignment calendar. And I've got, roughly 82 cases pending for trial coming up in the next several months. Well, a certain amount of those are going to get resolved by plea negotiations. That's just what will happen at some point. What you're going to find, though, is once, these cases that are backlogged, as they work their way through the system, what you're going to see is the existing cases are going to be tried out. They will get resolved, and it's sort of an interesting situation where we have trial calendars. We might have 35 people on a final plea calendar, and X percentage will enter a plea, and the remaining those will stand on they're not guilty and have a trial. Typically, we're going to take the most serious, the person who is in jail, and it's the oldest case because those deserve to be tried first. Well, as the input, which is the arrest, indictment, and accusation, if we don't have those, then everybody gets onto a trial calendar. Anybody who wishes to have a trial will have it. What you're going to find, though, is once those cases start coming in from the district attorney's office, those 1,000+ felonies, it will take a long time to get to those cases to be tried. It doesn't happen because you can only try so many cases in 1 week, depending on what the nature and the charge is.
Thanks, Judge. I know Mike had a question, and then go and ask for some resolution of this agenda item.
No, I'm going to ask if we can go ahead and make a resolution now by making a motion to approve the grant application, but also within this motion, Mayor, I'd like to direct our manager's office to engage our public defender's office to determine what the parity and cost would be for just what they think the next 3 years they'll need, and ask that the manager and mayor forward this to a February-March agenda cycle for discussion and possibly vote. So that's my motion to help address the needs for the courts and for the public defender's office.
I second the motion.
All right, I've got a motion on the floor and a second. All right, any counter motion?
I have a question.
Yeah.
So the motion on the floor right now does include approving option 1, A, B, C, D that's in the packet.
Yes, ma'am.
And then the next topic is coming down the next cycle.
That's correct.
Okay. All right. I'm clear. I'm good.
All right. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed?
Aye.
All right. Please note, Clerk Spratlin, Commissioner Houle.
Okay.
All right. So we will obviously.
Mr. Mayor.
Yeah.
I apologize, but there was an ordinance associated with that item.
If you could please read that, I appreciate it.
An ordinance to amend the FY 2022 operating capital budget for Athens-Clarke County, Georgia, so as to provide grant funding if awarded from the Georgia Administrative Office of the Courts, AOC, to address court backlog due to pandemic, including 21 additional positions for the judiciary and for other purposes.
Thanks, Attorney Drake. And we'll just confirm. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
And those opposed, please now.
Aye.
All right. And again, Clerk Spratlin, please make sure you note Commissioner Houle opposed. All right.
Okay, thank you.
All right, TJ, Elisa, Judge Norris, we really appreciate you being here. Thank you very much. Entertain a motion to adjourn the special called session.
So moved.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the time tonight, folks. We really do appreciate your consideration.
You're welcome. I've got a motion to adjourn from Commissioner Thornton. Is there a second?
Second.
All right, I've got a motion from Commissioner Thornton, a second from Commissioner Denson. All in favor of adjourning special called session, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? All right, we will move right into our work session. And again, we have 3 items. 2 of those are TSPLOST project from the 2018 package, the one that we're still collecting pennies on. And so I'd ask Keith Sanders to go ahead and discuss the bus stop and transfer facilities improvements for us.
And Mayor, if I might, I would just ask too that just in the spirit of getting through these, if everybody could hold their questions to the end of the presentation, we're glad to go back and go through them as much as possible. With particular focus on the police equipment and policies, and the chief and the sheriff are here. It's a lot of information to cover. So if we can just hold those questions to the end of each presentation, that'd be appreciated.
Definitely. Thanks, Manager Williams.
Okay. Thank y'all for the opportunity to be here tonight. I'll try to move through it quickly. I know you've got a lot and you've already been here for a while. So this first presentation is on the remote transfer facilities for the TSPLOST bus stop improvements for transit. So we're going to go through where we are in the process with the site selection and go through, look at some candidate sites. We'll talk about the history and the user groups, and then we'll go through each of those sites. So the user group has been acting as our site selection committee for this. We brought that back, as we'll talk about in a minute, in a NOPA, and got approval for that. We have 2 citizen resident members, Ms. Stewart and Ms. Freeman, and then 3 staff members, as you can see there. A real brief history on this TSPLOST project. Of course, a referendum in 2017. Mayor Commission accepted the transit development plan in 2018, and also as part of that led up to it was a feasibility study. Both of those had massive public engagement efforts, as we'll go through. In 2020, on our 3rd attempt, Athens-Clarke County received a $400,000 grant for the site selection and acquisition. Part of this transfer facility had submitted twice before and was denied, but those submissions were for site selection and construction, and ultimately we were, notified or told that if we just submit for the site selection first, we'd stand a better chance, and so we did that. We submitted to y'all back in June of last year, NOPA, asking for slightly amended major site selection process. Biggest change just being that the user group served as the site selection committee. And then we've gone through 3 public engagement sessions to get to this point tonight. So trying to catch everybody back up, and also for the public, if you're not aware of what a remote or just a transfer facility is for transit, currently the system operates as a hub and spoke. You've got the multimodal center downtown, which functions as the hub. All the routes come and go from that hub. If somebody wants to transfer between routes, for the most part, they have to come back to the hub, catch the next route, and then move on. So what we're looking at in this is really a total shift in operations, which would move us to a point-to-point. Think of it as multiple hubs out there where passengers can shift between routes at these transfer facilities without coming back to the multimodal facility. It allows them to get to their locations quicker and reduces that travel time, also improves efficiency, and ultimately really allows for some future expansion options that everyone has talked about in the different plans. When we started this process, we came back to you last year, and there were 3 zones that were developed as part of the transit development plan that needed to be looked at for these transfer facilities. On the west part of the side of the county, zone 1, they come in further, closer into town, zone 2, and then on the far east side was zone 3. We're going to look at these a little more in depth at each one, but those were developed based on the feasibility study and the development plan that, as you see here, had over 1,000 comments, public comments in both of those efforts. And so that's really what led to these zone locations being selected. These would allow for trying to get passengers to be able to get to their routes in 30 minutes from any location. So when we started this effort and we went to the public, we looked at those 3 zones, and we started looking at 8,300 parcels in total to select a site for this. The flow chart of what we went through, again, we had the almost 8,200 sites. We're going to hit each one of these a little more in depth, so I'm going to, in interest of time, just skip through this, but it's here if you want to reference it. So with those sites we took out, we had public engagement. We did 3 different rounds of public engagement. Normally in site selection this stage, we would have probably 1, but particularly with the pandemic and trying to get as much input as possible, we held 3 of these. And we did hold them waiting for school to start, did them after UGA was back in session. We did extensive advertising on the buses themselves, social media flyers, newspaper, and then sending out emails to all of the past participants from those other 2 studies, as well as stakeholder groups, neighborhood groups, trying to get interest in these site locations. So we had about 120 in total that attended the 3 sessions, and they participated in being able to put push pins on the map in person, and also electronically online. We had surveys to look at for people to put their input that way as well. After going through that first round, or that public input, and then also looking at removing residential parcels or those parcels that were in the future comprehensive plan for residential, we were able to cut that list down to 1,200 parcels in the 3 different zones. And then we removed sites that were less than 2 acres, floodplains, flood zones, or parcels that were already in use. If there was a site that was, or a parcel that was applicable, but it already had an operating business on it, we cut that site out of the list. You know, didn't want to look at putting a Chick-fil-A or another business out of service to put a transfer facility on it. So we did that. That got us reduced those sites down to about 88. We took those 88 parcels and we put the scoring criteria that the Mayor and Commission had approved. And this is part of the typical site selection process, which, you know, see coming in this year, you'll probably see quite a few of these for, you know, we've got a lot of site selections from the library, Eastside Youth Center, fire station as part of the 2020 program. So we'll do something very similar for each of those. We have 2 different types of criteria. We have specific site criteria that's needed, more technical in nature, and then we have community values criteria. So we scored all of those 88 parcels against this criteria that had been previously approved. And with that, those scores, we come back with the top ranking 16 candidate sites. They're made up of 29 parcels across the 3 zones. For example, this first line item here in zone 1, there are 2 different parcels that make up that particular site. So that's why we have 29 parcels, but in all there's 16 grouped recommended candidate sites that we're looking at. So we're going to step through each of those 16 pretty quickly, just so you, and this is all part of the agenda cycle coming forward, so you have it that way as well. In zone 3, and I'm going to start at the east and work west, is 4 particular sites. Southeast Clarke Park, I think probably obvious to most, is the leading really candidate site for that. There's a TSPLOST 23 project that was submitted to help fund the construction of a facility at this site. It's already owned by the government, and so that is one of the leading probably sites. The Walmart is another one on the zone 3. And again, I'm not going to read the pros and cons to you. You can look at those, but it is, and it is a commercial site. So that with it alone has its own different pros and cons, but it is one of the most trafficked locations as far as destinations for people on transit on this side of the community. So again, that's another potential or a candidate site. The other 2 that rank to the highest in zone 3 are the Lowe's Shopping Center parcel itself, and then there's 2 out parcels that shopping center. And then catty-cornered is the Willowwood Square, which has Ollie's and Goodwill in it right now. That's a shopping center that could be potentially has some space on that site. So those are 4 on zone 3. Moving to the west as you come through downtown, and then hit zone 2 first, because if there's an expansion that's going to be done on going to the west, zone 2 site would need to be acquired first, and we'd need a transfer facility at zone 2 first, because in order to be able to get from the multimodal out, there's got to be a transfer point in this zone before you get to the far west in zone 1, in order to keep those times down to that 30-minute window that we are shooting for. So when we went through those properties against the scoring criteria, there are 3 different sites made up of several parcels. So the first one is the Beechwood Shopping Center, and I realize that is a very active commercial site, but it is one that was ranked high with the scoring and also the public input, and it's also a very predominant location within that zone that people are trying to access. The other 2, there is the what's now Home Shopping Center. It used to be Big Lots. Not Big Lots.
Hobby Lobby.
Yeah, thank you. So there's 3 parcels that make up that particular site that are worth further looking at, and then also the Hayward Allen Parkway parcels. They're not as close to destinations as some of the other sites, but they are a large undeveloped parcel, and similar to the others that scored highly, they do have traffic signals that would allow 2-way movement, and so those are our 3 zone 2 sites. None of those 3 are really what I would call as high scoring as we would probably like. Probably the most ideal for zone 2, but it's slightly outside of what was originally rated as zone 2, is one we're going to talk about here in zone 1. These undeveloped parcels behind Panera, which is just past the Target. Those are a little further than Transit would like to go for their zone 2 parcels, but it's right on the far edge of that. But the reason zone 2 is important is if the site there needs to be picked first, because where that site is will impact where the other applicable sites in zone 1 can be. For example, if I can go back to zone 2, if the Hayward Allen parcels were selected in zone 2, they're the farthest edge of zone 2. Well, we wouldn't want to then look at zone 1 sites that were just on the edge of zone 1. We would want to be concentrating further to the west in zone 1. So they do have a natural progression of where we would want to look, how we would want to go about selecting and looking at these for purchase. So in zone 1, we have these 2 parcels behind Panera. The Athens West Shopping Center. It's got big lots in it, has some available, and I say available, it has space on it that's usable perhaps for this type facility. There's some previously developed lots across the street just before you get to Timothy that are these also worth looking at. Moving further out, there is Athens Ministry. There's used to be I think the Walmart was in this shopping center years ago, just outside the loop. Georgia Square Mall is another high scoring piece, particularly with the redevelopment that I've heard advertised this week and see on the Planning Commission. You know, maybe there's an opportunity to look into that, a joint something in that piece of property. Moving further out, wrong direction. Slides are moving further out. There is Ben Burton Circle in Industrial Park. There's a piece of property that scored high. You might recall we just built to the east of that the fire station number 2 in the Cooperative Extension Center. And then also there is an adjacent parcel next to the newly built CarMax. So those are the sites that have scored the highest that we're recommending to go into the next stage 3 of site selection, which is stage 3 is we do more detailed analysis of the site, cost estimate, do some preliminary site plans for those, do some more due diligence as far as applicability, and then we would bring that back to Mayor and Commission after we go through those steps, and that would be brought in closed session, and we would probably be looking to do that in somewhere in the May timeframe, and then we'd be trying to acquire those sites in the June-July timeframe. And I know I went through all of that quickly, but be glad to open it up for questions.
Thanks for this, Keith. And as you just referenced, we've got a couple more stops along the way before any property acquisition or implementation of programming. So thanks for making that clear. But any questions at this stage of the game? Jesse? Thanks.
Yeah, I'm curious if we could get a little more information on the role TADS would play in funding these. And I also don't know if there's a breakdown of which of these sites fall into TADS. My understanding is that the developers of the mall are planning to put in place a request for TAD money to go toward this, among other things that could happen on site there, especially if we choose to do this there. And so I don't know how many other opportunities there are like that for these other places, but that opportunity for funding to me seems like a big factor in deciding where to put these.
And I would think that'd be part of what we do in the stage 3 of going through each of the sites, seeing where what funding opportunities, if there are any particular ones, whether the site's in a TAD, not in a TAD, or it has that, there's any particular, anything else specific for those locations. We're not asking for these sites to be acquired. We're asking for them to move to the next stage of investigation at this point.
And I guess just one specific question about the mall specifically, since that's a big topic of discussion right now. Do you, and sorry if I missed this when you were saying where kind of the new line would be, but if you end up on that westernmost edge of zone 2, would the mall be too far east to be a good decision, or is that kind of unclear right now?
I think it depends on where we end up in zone 1, but we do have Pat Hale is with us that might could answer that a little better.
Pat, is there some ideal separation between those two nodes?
Right now, the mall has service then we're going to continue to put service there. I'm not sure exactly what you're asking. Just could you kind of give me a little bit more of what you're looking for?
Keith in his presentation was saying that depending on where we select a spot in Zone 2, that would affect what would make sense for Zone, I think it's 1, right? The one that has the mall in it.
Put the map back up.
Yeah. And so I guess I was just trying to get clarity on whether the mall would be a good location in Zone 1 regardless, or if that's far enough east in Zone 1 that whether the mall makes sense kind of depends on what's decided for Zone 2. Does that make sense?
It does. The mall was considered, and in this process, it was considered. And I guess to answer that for you, just to give you a best answer I can, is that we have 2 stops already at the mall, so it's an ideal spot to put one. I guess I have to go back to Keith to say I can't remember how we ruled that one out, or either Rachel.
Yeah, that one's still on the site and still on the list. And maybe Rachel, I know you were looking at the travel times on the sites a little more. Maybe you can help.
Sure. Rachel Hatcher, for the record, with RSNH, part of the consulting team. So ideally, what we would find is when Zone 2 parcel is selected based on the most optimal functionality for the transit system and accessibility by the public, as well as ability to develop, then we would not want to go any closer than a 15-minute headway distance, which is looking at travel time at peak service. So you would want to look at that distance and ability to take a bus 15 minutes from the point of the site selected in Zone 2. Any closer and you would be overlapping service for headways that would be impractical for the system. So you certainly do have parcels that would be within that 15-minute headway from Zone 2 to Zone 1 at the mall. So if you selected one that was further east, it would be more practical to select the mall as that next stop. So it really just does depend on how far west you travel with the site that's selected in Zone 2. But the mall was considered one of our ideal locations for the traveling public. And the next step will help reveal a little bit more about how practical it will be to space that appropriately from Zone 2. But as Pat was saying, it's important to note that even if it's not selected as a transfer location, service to the mall will continue and will be a very important stop, but may not be the location for a transfer facility if we can't make it work spacing wise.
Thanks for that. Carol?
Yeah, quick question, Keith, on the public input. It sounded like you guys did a really great job reaching out in these difficult times to get through to people. I was wondering if everyone responded to all 3 different zones, or if you got more input, for example, on the east side or the west side or the central side, or if you could comment on that or follow up with that, that's fine as well.
Yeah, and I will say, and I'll let Rachel answer that a little more fully, but in the agenda report, we have included the full report of all the public engagement. So, but I'll let Rachel address that because she kind of headed up our public engagement on-site activities.
Yes, sir. Happy to jump in. We did encourage all participants to place pins in each of the 3 zones. What we did find is that when we scheduled meetings within those zones, and that was an important emphasis for us as a consulting team to make sure that we were working with Athens-Clarke County staff to identify opportunities for outreach within the zones that would potentially have these facilities. And we did notice that when we were at the DMV, folks were more eager to place pins in that zone because that's where they were located and where they were doing business. But we did share with them information about the other zones and encouraged them to place pins in all 3. I would say we probably, arbitrary number, probably got somewhere between 75 and 80% of all participants placing pins in each zone. It was more than not that participated in all 3. In the online survey, folks really didn't place pins specifically by zone with the goal of placing one in each, but rather just focused in on properties that were of interest to them. So in person with some coaching, we did have more broad spread on the online version where folks were self-led. They placed them where they were most interested.
Tim?
You. I have two questions. So one, I was going through I saw the slide with the site criteria and the difference between community values and then the site criteria for site selection. And part of it's covered up, so it's hard to see, but was going into that, was part of that, such as our future trail expansion, Athens in Motion plan and such, trying to overlay that with what's going to be there in the future, probably hopefully around the same time that maybe or after these things are built. Was that taken into account also?
Keith, would you like for me to answer that? Absolutely.
I think so, but I'll let Rachel handle that.
It absolutely was. So we took the existing bike ped facilities and future bike ped facilities, and that was part of our scoring criteria. So that was actually a point that was brought up early by our user group, that we didn't want to penalize sites because they didn't have infrastructure, particularly if those were identified as areas that were very much in need of that infrastructure. So the decision was made to incorporate in our screening process the planned facilities and to indicate that in our Excel spreadsheet. Yes, it currently has facilities, or no, it doesn't, but they are planned. So properties were not excluded because they did not have those facilities. In fact, they scored equally to those that already had them. Okay,
thank you. That completely answers my question. I appreciate that. And just my one observation, then one last question on that. I'm a little concerned with some of the things that are on here, which I'm guessing is probably won't be the ones that float to the top, maybe, but about how they are kind of isolated, especially when it comes to pedestrian and cycling accessibility. And that I know that in cities, the transit systems that use this kind of model, that's an important thing of who can actually reach those facilities, bike, walking. They're in that kind of precious quarter mile area. So I just know that as an observation, but I'm sure that'll be taken care of. My last question is on some of these. I mean, they're very specific parcel sites. Are we looking at possibly any flexibility around those into places that might be very adjacent and close by and maybe more cheaper or more easy to access and to acquire? I think Beechwood, as was said, would be, a fantastic one, but it is pretty busy. There's a lot of growth happening there. But then I think about like the Omni shopping center, the old Kroger that's just kind of just around through a back road that's right behind it. Is it flexible at all besides those specific parcels?
Well, and I can let Rachel answer about, I don't remember about the old Kroger site, where that fell off, but it is set. Once y'all approve the candidate sites, those are the ones will have then given us staff direction to go investigate. Now, if there's others that need to be added to the list, they could be added as part of your approval, but we wouldn't go add and do site evaluations on sites that you haven't approved for us to do. And part of because of the grant opportunities, we've got to follow the process that's been laid out in order to satisfy the state and federal grant.
That's helpful, Keith. I have the same question. Any other questions from commissioners? All right. Well, we'll see a couple more iterations of this in the months ahead. Thank you, everyone. I appreciate it very much. Moving forward now to another TSPLOST project that very close to my life and home and where I'm sitting right now, the Prince Avenue corridor improvements.
Thank you. And Diana Jackson, project manager with us, is going to lead that presentation. So I'll let her take it away.
All right. Tonight I'm here to present the recommended list of the priority projects for the TSPLOST Project 16, the Prince Avenue corridor improvements. Our agenda tonight, I'm not going to read it to you, is what's shown. Keith, you could do next slide, please. And again, tonight's purpose is to present this list of the recommended projects that can be moved to the concept phase. Our user group was consisted of 6 residents and 4 staff as voting members, and their charge was to review the many previous studies and data to develop the list that we're presenting this evening. Next slide, please. in the history, as you can read, since 2004, there have been 8 studies of the Prince Avenue corridor in some form or fashion. And again, I think we presented these to you before, so I'm not going to read them to you. In 2014, there was also a parallel action with Georgia DOT and Transportation and Public Works staff that resulted from a road safety audit. That's your 3rd bullet and 4th bullet. And we'll talk about Georgia DOT's project in a few slides. Next slide, Keith. In November, actually, it's the 2nd and 3rd slide, and actually the last slide also talk about this road safety audit. Next slide, Keith. And then in November of 2020, the user group was appointed and their work began. In June of last year, the user group's draft list of projects was presented to you at a work session, and that was prior to initiating any of the public engagement. Again, in your agenda report, there are links to all of those previous studies, so you don't have to go find them. And also, just of note is that in all of those previous studies, there was some sort of public engagement associated with their efforts. So on this slide, this is kind of just a little flow chart about what happened, how we got to our project prioritization process. The user group amassed all of the recommendations from those 8 studies, and when they did that, they were left with 113 projects. Yeah, really 113 of them. And then the user group sorted through those 12, sorted them into 12 categories for further consideration, and then through many meetings, long discussions, and several voting sessions, they triaged this list down to 31 projects in 4 categories, those categories being vehicular, pedestrian, bicycle, and general safety improvements. And those were all presented to you at that work session last June. Those 31 projects were introduced to the public for comment, and we'll talk about engagement in the next slide or two. And then from that, 6 projects, Keith, go back, thank you, were removed because they're already part of the GDOT project. And so we didn't feel like we needed to list them if GDOT was already going to do them. And then finally, after all this sifting and sorting, the user group developed this tiered list of 25 projects. And it was their desire that this list be used for both this project and any future TSPLOST planning and other funding opportunities, kind of like a master plan for the Prince Avenue corridor. Next slide, please, Keith. So our public engagement occurred in August and September of 21. And with the assistance of staff, we had both an online survey and story map, as well as in-person pop-ups with paper copies of the survey. Staff and the user group reached out to these partnerships listed there, and with the PI's office, they helped us assist with social media and other tactile messaging. And as you can see, we had 315 respondents to that survey, and with more than 1,000 individually written comments. Next slide, Keith. The user group compiled these comments into this graphic. In the upcoming agenda report, you'll find another table that presents the number of comments by pros and cons by category, and then an assemblage of each of these written comments, again, sorted by category. But I think it's interesting to see, you know, they're basically broken into seven different sections, and it's interesting to see who commented on what. Next slide, please, Keith. So this is the GDOT project, and it has an approved concept plan. It includes site lighting upgrades, signal upgrades at 8 locations, 3 mid-block crossing upgrades, ADA ramps, raised medians, and basically resurfacing and restriping the entire corridor from Sunset to Pulaski. And staff has already requested GDOT's consideration of another mid-block crossing at the Social Security Administration building and to landscape those medians. So GDOT's preliminary plan phase began last fall, and it's nearing 50% completion, and right-of-way authorization is expected to begin in the fall. Next slide, Keith, please.
You don't have to call him every time. He knows who he is.
All right, and so this slide presents our the list of 25 tiered projects. Again, the overarching goal from the user group was to make Prince Avenue safe for all corridor users. This final list is sorted by tier, and then within tier by cost. And the cost is again $1, $2, $3 signs. And on to the left there, it tells you what each of those dollar signs represents. It's important to note that these 25 projects came from that larger list of 113. So just because something's listed as a tier 3 project, it's still considered essential to the overall goals of this project. Next slide, Keith. These next two slides are going to graphically show you what's been initially developed by the engineers assisting the user group. And this slide here shows the mid-block crossings that have been recommended at Georgia Avenue, Sylvia Circle, and Boulevard Heights. And the next slide, please, Keith. This slide shows the much desired Park Avenue, Talmadge Drive intersection improvements. Reducing the road skews, adding crosswalks on all 4 sides, and pedestrian refuge. You've already heard about this as it was proposed as for the TSPLOST 2023 project. The user group identified it as a tier 1 project, but its final budget exceeds the SPLOST 2018 budget. But the user group wanted to make sure that you knew that this was a project that was crucial to what they feel to be a corridor safety issue. Next slide, please. So there's also 4 recommended projects that require other departments or policy decisions. Consolidating utility poles and reducing curb cuts may need to move to the Corridor Policy Committee for setting new standards of practice. And while more frequent bus trips should be more of a discussion or exploration with transit, and then finally, public access to the Piedmont University's parking deck would require discussions between the university and ACC Gov. Next slide, please, Keith. The Prince Avenue corridor overall budget is $3.9 million, and of that, approximately 2.8 is available for construction and contingency. And so last slide, Keith. The next steps would be your consideration of this list at the February regular session. And GDOT will be holding the public information open house in the next month or 2. They haven't held any public engagement yet for this project. It's important to know that. And then the user group will be working with Transportation and Public Work to forward some of these projects in that tiered 25 list to GDOT for their consideration to potentially include in this current in their current project. And then if you vote to approve this list, the user group will begin developing some project concepts that will be brought back to you for future consideration. Thank you very much for your time, and I'd like to open it up for any questions or comments.
Thanks, Diana. Appreciate that. And again, you'll see that in this coming cycle as sort of the master list. So I'll begin with Melissa, who may challenge me for crow fly distance to this corridor.
Yeah, thank you. I'm really excited about this list, and I really appreciate the hard work of the committee. I think they've done a really good job in identifying the top priorities. You know, those mid-block crossings are crucial, and they're actually like some pretty low budget, low-hanging fruit. I'm curious about the 3-laning from Millage to Pulaski, which is something I am personally very much in favor of. Does that present any conflict with GDOT? Is there any special GDOT approval we need to go through, or since we have maintained control of that, is that something that we can totally green light?
Well, I So first of all, thank you for that question because it's a good question. We are in the process of actually doing a traffic study to look at this. And I hope to have results of that in the next couple weeks. And that will enable transportation and public works staff to determine whether or not that is feasible. And we would have to work with Georgia DOT, because if that was something that was, say, a project that could move forward, I think the timing of it, because they're going to resurface and restripe it, as long as we don't have to change what happens between curb to curb, I think that's something we could be working with them to accomplish.
So is that segment being looked at in chunks? Because there is that very in town, I mean, what is considered downtown portion from Barber to Pulaski, and then there's the portion to Millage. Is that being considered, that if it may not be feasible for the outer chunk, it might very likely be feasible for that inner couple blocks?
If you look at the tiered list, you'll actually see that they split it out as separate because they didn't want it to be an all or nothing thing. Yeah. So the user group specifically did that.
Okay, good. Okay. Yeah, from what I understand, the traffic volume has not gone up significantly on the corridor despite the population increase. I saw some statistics about that. So I'm looking forward to that traffic study.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Got Russell.
Thank you. Ms. Jackson, will GDOT pay for a protected bike lane?
So they had bike lanes in the project a long time ago when it first came out as a road safety audit, and then they removed it for, and I can't answer that, and I don't see that anybody else from TPW is on that, but I can find out the answer for why it was removed. But I think that if we wanted to add that, we would probably have to pay for that, would be my thoughts on it.
That stinks. I mean, they're remilling and paving the whole thing. I mean, it seems like it.
But I don't think that it would be, it's not a huge thing, I think, to add in, if we're just going to put in like the bollard type things, the little rubber type things that separate them. I don't think that that's a huge dollar investment as long as we're staying in the same curb line.
What kind of bollards are you talking about?
Talking about, and I'm not a bike person, so I'm just saying.
I want something kind of beefy, that actually provides. I think Keith knows what I'm talking about. Some protection, either a concrete curbing or something that can really be a physical protection to keep cars from maybe swerving accidentally.
Right. You're referring more to a raised curb or a concrete barrier type.
Yeah, that's that's definitely what I'd like to see on prints, just because of the volume of traffic in the residential areas. I mean, I want a lane that will give parents the security to say, okay, yeah, my child can go ride the bike down Prince Avenue. And I just don't, bollards aren't going to do that.
And I think that that's something that if it is something that can be moved forward, we can look into that. Tool Design, who's done other bike stuff in town, is part of the team.
Oh, good. Yeah, because the mayor and I talked with them about the Barber Street project. I'm sorry, Pulaski Street project. No. Barber Street.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. We met with Tool.
Yeah, same thing.
Yeah, so they're on the team, so they'll come up with whatever we feel like is necessary to make people feel safe.
Good.
But that's not currently in the GDOT project. That's just so, and they're willing to pay for milling and repaving curb to curb, and I would imagine, based on what they've said, and this is that if we added a protected barrier, they would pay between those protected barriers, but probably not the bike lanes outside the protected barriers. Probably.
Is there any way to petition GDOT to include that in the project scope?
think if you show up to the public information open house and talk to them about it, but again, they could let the contract and have it be part of the contract, and we would just pay that portion of it.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thanks, Russell. I've got Carol and Tim.
Diana, or this might be a question for Keith. I had a message from one of the members of the user group who I've worked with on transportation issues, who questioned one of the GDOT proposals for continuous raised medians. And I know you said there was going to be a public input on that, and that could be brought up at that point. But they told me that the user group had verified that GDOT doesn't have any traffic studies or public surveys to support this proposal, and that moreover, this proposal doesn't reflect the recommendations of the 2014 road safety audit, which mentions pedestrian refuge islands, but only one such island and not this continuous, this continuous raised median. And I wondered if either of you could address that.
It's true they have not conducted traffic studies. In fact, they've asked us for a copy of ours when we finish ours. And then they have not conducted any public engagement. So what will happen in the next month or two will be the first time the public has seen that. And there were concerns and there were comments about the continuous raised medians, and all 1,000, it's like maybe 1,100 comments. They're all going to be they're all part of your agenda packet.
Could you sort of summarize the key issues with that continuous median that are problematic for people?
Well, the problem I think for business owners is maybe the limiting of the left turn into businesses, turning left into the business. But I think in GDOT's mind, the continuous medians slow people down. And also reduce these conflict points, as they call it, the left turn movements. So in GDOT's mind, it does make the corridor safer. Now, I think if we could work with the business owners and make the breaks in the continuous medians where it makes sense. They're not continuous all along the corridor. They're chunks of medians. It's 3 different places. It's actually Georgia Avenue to Talmadge, west of King, and Nakuchi to Chase. I think that we could work again with business owners to maybe add in a break point in between them if there was something that was needed, to make sure that businesses still had some way for people to come in other than having to do a U-turn to come back to a business.
Thanks. I'll make
sure if I answered your question.
No, that's good. And I'll go to that GDOT session and learn more.
Okay.
Thanks, Carol. Tim.
Really appreciate all the work that's done here by staff and by the committee. And what I really liked, something I haven't seen a lot of times in these presentations later on, is the slide 14, which is the proposed projects that require other departments or policy decisions. I thought that was really smart for them to bring that forward, because oftentimes, some of the improvements or things that we need here aren't necessarily things that have to be funded or just funded, but also sometimes policy decisions, something like that too. So I would love in the agenda items as we move forward through this conversation, I would love for those items to also be fleshed out about what is necessary from this body and from staff for us to possibly move some of those things forward. I know some of them we've already explored somewhat, the consolidating utility poles in the corridor, but still, for us to be able to flesh those things out a little bit so that possibly we can be advancing some of those simultaneously with us allocating funds to fix some of the other ones. So yeah, if we could have that as part of the next agenda item as we move forward, I would love that.
Thanks, Tim. And Diana, you began to reference this when you were talking about the milling and repaving, but it sounds like there's some interest in our part, certainly, and the state's part in conjoining activities so that, we're assembling one crew to do a multitude of work, rather than setting multiple crews out onto the road at different times. So basically saving state dollars and local dollars by combining efforts.
Exactly.
So that's great. I appreciate that a lot. I want to say I'm very favorable toward the protected bike lanes, and I think Russell highlighted this. I mean, significantly protected in the way that Toole did a great job describing when they were on Barber Street with us a few months ago, and that you can see in Atlanta and Greenville, and I think I saw New York City a couple of years ago, and see in many communities where you have a substantial physical barrier to provide that protection described. And also very supportive, both for safety reasons and aesthetics, of those linear planted medians, which I hope we see in the future on a lot of other corridors as we approach Jefferson Highway, and hopefully in some other GDOT corridors like Commerce Road, where you've got very long spans, in some cases with no left turn movements toward either direction. I think as you approach Sandy Creek Nature Center, for example. So just as a treatment, I think that does our corridors very well. So I'm excited about this list, and I'll be really excited when this is in place. All right, any others? All right, we are going to move on to our final discussion of the evening of Athens-Clarke County Police Department equipment and policies. Commissioners were particularly interested in knowing about those elements of our police department materials that kind of had the militaristic bent, and wanting to sort of see the continuum of provisions. And so Chief Spruill is here from the Athens-Clarke County Police Department.
Actually, really quick, Mr. Mayor.
Yes.
I just wanted to let y'all know I'm going to head out here in a second. I don't trust the chief's ability to engage professionally with reasoned critique. And beyond that, Juan Joseph Castellano, who was killed in the park behind my house last summer, just days before getting killed, put a plea on Facebook that someone send him $1. And I respect some colleagues that think better use of force policies would have saved his life, but frankly, well-funded anti-poverty programs and mental health care services actually would have. So if we're going to have continued work sessions on public safety, I respectfully request that we have one soon on public health guidance regarding violence prevention, as 5 of us expressed interest in learning more about at our December voting meeting. And I hope you'll have a productive discussion. Good night.
We'll continue to address those preventative and behavioral health components as well. Do I note also that the Sheriff John Q is with us, and so he'll be providing some feedback as well as this pertains to his department.
Mayor.
Go ahead, Manager Williams.
I asked Chief Spruill to come tonight to present this information as requested by the Mayor and Commission. And I would like to ask that there not be a tax on our staff.
I think that's fair, Manager Williams.
Tax is not appropriate.
This is something that many commissioners requested, and I appreciate staff assembling the material. We know that we're working toward many things at once, and that includes an appropriately provisioned police department, and it also includes appropriately deployed behavioral health and youth development activities and other things. So, Chief, I very much appreciate you being here. Sheriff, I appreciate you being here. We want to provide full opportunity for you to present this, because I know it is a lot of material and there's a continuity of activity that you want to be able to describe. And then following that presentation, we'll have an opportunity for questions from commissioners.
Mayor Gertz, I'd also like to add a little context for what the public is about to see. This was a specific request from the Commission about the types of equipment that are used by the police department and the sheriff. I invited Sheriff Sheriff here as well to talk about some of the similar things that they use in their operations. So this isn't a budget request. This is not something we would have ordinarily done, but we do it out of promoting understanding of the equipment that is used and how it's used and why it's used. And we're here I think it was pointed out before by another commissioner that perhaps there's not enough access to Chief Spruill, and we want to, share with you and provide the public with understanding about how we conduct law enforcement and protect the courthouse and house individuals at the jail. So with that, Chief Spruill, thank you for being here, Sheriff as well.
Thank you for having me. Let me begin by asking that if Chief Kelly, he will be maybe commenting also during this part of the presentation. So if he may need the ability to share information or share a screen at some point in this presentation. So let me first begin by thanking. I want to thank the mayor and the commission for allowing me the opportunity to share this information about the tools and equipment that our officers are authorized to carry and utilize. Begin with the department as a full service law enforcement agency. We respond to over 100,000 calls for service each year. And among those calls for service are some very dangerous and often violent calls for service. So for example, over the last 2 years, we averaged about 500 aggravated assaults each year. When you consider that information and you consider some of the other incidents that we see take place out in our community, you have to acknowledge that we're being asked to police in a heavily armed and sometimes very violent community. We've seen on a regular basis homes in some of our communities that are shot up sometime by individuals armed with high-powered rifles. We saw the Ariel Calloway shooting incident that took place where more than 80 rounds were fired and a young woman and her unborn child lost their lives. We know that we have a gang problem in Athens and that many of these gang members are armed with high-powered assault rifles, and even here recently, they were armed with a landmine. And we have responded to credible threats against our schools where when we investigated, the individual that made those threats was found to be in possession of a high-powered rifle. Perhaps the most poignant example is the Walker Park active shooter incident that occurred here last summer. In this case, a armed individual shot rounds into an occupied vehicle. The vehicle was occupied by a woman. He robbed a park attendant at gunpoint. He carjacked a family in the parking lot, and he was pointing this long gun at children and women in the park on this day. And so whether we're talking about looking at some of the incidents that have occurred nationally as far as active shooter and mass casualty incidents, like the shooting at Mandalay Bay or Pulse nightclub in Orlando, Florida, or if we're looking at some of the incidents that have happened right here in our own backyard, like the Walker Park active shooter incident, these incidents illustrate the need to ensure that our officers have the tools and equipment that they need to do the very difficult and very dangerous job that we're asking them to do, and that they're able to do it in the safest way possible. Now, I do want to acknowledge that there's also a need for us to not appear overly militarized. We know that there are some law enforcement agencies that gain a reputation or an image of being overly militarized, excessive. We don't want to appear to be overly militarized. And so I think my challenge as a police chief is to find the right balance to where we can make sure that we are giving our officers the tools and equipment that they need to do the difficult job that they do and to stay safe while at the same time not appearing to be overly militaristic. We've shared information with the commission in the past about some other tools beyond equipment that we use to strike that balance. And so there's an enormous amount of training that we put our officers through. We have policies and processes in place to ensure that our officers not only have understand the equipment that they're authorized to use, but they also understand when and how that they can use it. And of course, we comply with national and state level best practices through accreditation through the Georgia Association of Chiefs of Police and through the Commission on Accreditation for Law Enforcement Officers. So, but our presentation tonight is really going to focus on the equipment and the tools that we use and not these other areas that we use to balance that dynamic. I'll start with the standard duty belt. Our officers wear the uniform, with the standard uniform. Our officers wear the standard uniform with their regular, with their badge of authority. They carry a duty belt. They have a duty belt with them, which contains basic equipment like handcuffs, radios, and flashlights. You may be aware that we also carry life-saving medical equipment, things like tourniquets, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later on. Of course, we require our officers to wear body-worn cameras, and this has proven to be very beneficial in ensuring accountability and transparency. For those few occasions where force may be necessary, our officers are authorized to carry either a PR-24 baton or an ASP expandable baton. And this is a striking instrument, and it is a tool that can be used to create pain compliance and using control holes to gain control over a combative subject. Next, we have oleorism capsicum, or it's better known as OC spray or pepper spray. And this is a derivative of cayenne pepper, which is aerosolized. And when it's sprayed into a person's eyes or nose or mucous membranes, it creates a burning sensation or discomfort, again, allowing the officer to gain control and compliance over a combative individual. Now, both of these are force compliant tools. And I want to point out that there are occasions where they may not be the most effective tool. And that is because in cases where a person might be under the influence of PCP or other pain numbing drugs, or where that person might have a high tolerance to pain, they may not be very effective. One tool that I know that the sheriff wants to talk about and that we found to be very effective is the taser. And the taser even remains effective on these types of individuals because it works differently. When a electrical impulse or electrical current is introduced into the muscles of the individual that the taser is used on, it causes those muscles to involuntarily contract, and that causes the person's body basically to seize up, and he's incapacitated, he or she is incapacitated, so that our officers can gain control. And then lastly, in those rare cases where lethal force is necessary, our officers are authorized to carry Glock 9mm handguns. We do, one tool we have is a use of force continuum, and our officers use that in their decision making about what level of force they're going to use, and that's going to really be dictated by the individual that they are addressing and the level or the threat of force that that person is displaying against that officer. Again, all of our officers wear basic body armor. I'm going to talk about that a little bit more in a few slides. Many of our officers are equipped with ballistic shields, and this is an added level of protection that our officers can take with them when they have to go into an area where there may be gunfire. Some of the, I talked about the fact that we carry medical equipment. We do that mainly through what we call a buddy kit. And this is a kit that has a tourniquet. It has coagulants to stop bleeding. It has gauze and bandages and other medical equipment that we use as life-saving tools to provide first aid and save lives out in the field. One of our most successful tools that we carry is Narcan, and this is a nasal spray that we've used to counter the effects of a person who is overdosing on opioids. Last year alone, we used that on 71 different occasions to counter those effects and essentially to save lives. We have stop sticks. Stop sticks are a device that we can use to put in the path of a fleeing automobile, and it slowly deflates the air out of a tire and disables that vehicle so that we can avoid high-speed vehicle pursuits. A number of our specially trained officers carry with them 40 millimeter sponge rounds. And this is a force compliance tool, but the difference is that it can be used from a greater distance. So if we're dealing with a person who might be armed with a knife or a club, our officer can keep distance from that individual and use this force compliance tool to disarm that person, disable that person, and they can do so without closing the distance and putting their own safety in jeopardy. We talked about pepper spray or OC spray earlier. Another chemical munition that we use is CS gas. And CS gas works pretty much the same as the oleorism capsicum or OC spray through pain compliance. It has been very effective for us at dislodging barricaded individuals from locations. It does have a area control and a crowd control use. And so we've found that a very effective tool. What I want to do is I've went through a lot of equipment kind of quickly, but I want to share a short video with you. And this is a video of one of our mini drones. We'll talk about regular drones in a few minutes, but this is a mini drone, and it's a video of an incident where it demonstrates some of this equipment in use. This is a case where our officers responded to a call for service. When they got to this location to check on this individual and they entered inside the home, the individual began shooting a gun inside that location. Our officers quickly de-escalated and backed out of that location, and then they were able to send the drone in to gather information. And so here's that video. So an officer is outside in a safe location. He's able to pilot the vehicle from that location, and that vehicle can, the drone can go inside, look around inside the location to see if the suspect or anyone else inside of the house has been shot or is in need of medical attention. He's also able to get information about what's going on inside of the house to help us formulate a plan on how to deal with the situation. You see on the left there, the room with the holes in the door, that's the room where this individual is actually barricaded at. So what we're doing here is looking to see if there are any other safety concerns and how we can develop a strategy to best deal with this incident. Our SRT team decided that the best strategy here was for us to deploy CS gas. They were able to deploy CS gas into the room here where you see the bullet holes, and they were able to take that individual into custody without using additional force and without anyone being injured. So we're getting ready to talk about some of our protective gear and about some of our firearms. And before we go there, I want to remind everyone that we are being asked to police in a heavily armed and often violent environment. As a matter of fact, in 2021 alone, we responded to 163 shooting calls for service. And that included 42 calls where people were actually shot. We recovered more than 400 guns, and we recovered about 961 shell casings. So think about this. That means that on at least 961 occasions last year, someone pulled a trigger and fired a gun in Athens-Clarke County. If you look at the chart down below that illustrates the calibers of various bullets, the ones that are circled in blue represent the caliber of the bullets that our officers carry when they're on the street. In red, you'll see the caliber of the bullets that were recovered, or the shell casings that were recovered from the scenes of these shootings, these 900 shell casings. And what I'd like to point out here is that in several of these cases, or a number of these cases, the caliber of the rounds that we're finding is greater than the caliber of the rounds that our officers have with them. And so it's not unprecedented that we would find ourselves in a situation where a suspect actually is outgunning our officers. I already talked about the Walker Park active shooter incident. Another case that I'd like to share with you that illustrates the dangerous job that we do involved a house in North Athens that was shot 25 times by several individuals using an assault rifle and a handgun. And as we go through this video, what I would ask you to do is a couple of things. First thing I'd ask is that you put yourself in the place of this homeowner. Imagine that it is you and your family and your children that are inside the house when this shooting is taking place. Secondly, what I would ask you to do is to listen closely, especially near the end of this video, because you'll hear that these people that have just committed this very violent act of shooting into an occupied dwelling are laughing and joking as if it's something funny about what they have done. And finally, what I'd ask you to do is I'd ask you to envision yourself as the police officer that has been dispatched on this call for service and asked to respond into this situation. Because this, unfortunately, in our communities, this is happening on a regular basis, and this is what we're asking our officers to do. We're asking them to run towards the sound of gunfire to protect our community, and this is what we're asking them to do on a regular basis. Chief Kelly? I'm not sure if we lost you, Chief Kelly. We can't hear you.
Yeah, we've got video, but no audio.
Are you unmuted, Chief?
Yes, sir. We are unmuted.
Okay, let me try to take it back over from you. You want to try one more time, Chief Kelly?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
I think due to bandwidth, that's not playing as well as we wanted it to. I'm going to try it one last time from my computer, and then if it does not work, we'll move on. So I'm not sure if you could hear that, but there was a barrage of gunfire and that went off, and then people laughing as they ran from the scene. And so on 163 separate occasions last year, we asked our officers to run into some scenes like that towards the sound of gunfire and disregard their own personal safety to try to protect our community. And so when we are asking our officers to do this, it's important that we give them the equipment and the tools necessary to handle those kind of situations first, and then second to keep themselves as safe as possible. I want to talk about our Lenco armored rescue vehicle. This is a vehicle that we use to do just that. It increases safety during rescues and during operations in what we call hot zones, and these are areas where an officer may be exposed to gunfire, or where they may be explosives or other materials that may cause a danger to the police officer. And just want to point out that we actually have medics that are embedded with us and that travel on these vehicles with us, and they carry first aid gear so that they can provide first aid if an individual is in need of it. This is a grant-funded vehicle that was acquired in 2013. And I'd also like to point out the fact that, although we responded on over 100,000 calls for service last year, this vehicle was only deployed in 13 cases. And so we are very selective about when and how we use this vehicle and our SRT team. Just to show you the value of this vehicle, I have a very short video that I'd like to share with you. This is a case where an individual who was wanted armed himself with a gun, and when officers tried to take him into custody, he began shooting at them while they were in a Lenco vehicle. This is not our vehicle. It's a similar vehicle in another jurisdiction. Down now. Down, Mr. Granger. And so it's a short video, but I think it very much illustrates the need for a vehicle like this. I think if you think about this same situation where an officer might have responded in a regular car or on foot, a regular car provides no additional protection. I can assure you that those officers would have immediately and appropriately returned fire. And so this incident would have ended in a very different way, with either the suspect or the officers being seriously injured or even killed. Because of this vehicle, they were able to back down, de-escalate, continue to negotiate, and ultimately end this incident without anyone being injured. Down in the bottom right-hand corner of this slide, very quickly, this is the back of a LGBTQ Pulse nightclub down in Orlando, Florida. And there was an incident at that location some time ago you may be aware of, where a gunman went in, killed a number of people, injured a number of people, and was holding a number of people hostage in the back of that club. Officers there were able to use a Lenco Bearcat vehicle similar to the one that we have to breach the back of that location, access the individual and neutralize him, and rescue those people from in that building. So there's a lot of uses. It's a critical piece of equipment. As we said, we don't use it often, only 13 times last year, but when you need something like this, you better have it. Our officers carry Glock 9mm handguns. We also authorize our officers to carry Remington 870 12-gauge shotguns. Our officers are issued or they're authorized to carry tactical rifles. Most of them are Daniel Defense System rifles or JP-15s. These are both, they both fire 5.56 caliber ammunition. Now, I do want to point out that we don't have a big enough supply of these tactical rifles to provide all of our officers with them. And so what has happened is we've seen some of our officers who've gone out and purchased their own tactical rifles with their own money. And after they were approved and qualified with them, they've been allowed to carry their personal tactical rifle on the streets with them. And we still have a number of people who even today don't have these tactical rifles. And you'll continue to see me make requests to increase our supply until we can provide one for all of our officers for their safety. I want to talk about the vest. We talked about soft body armor that our regular patrol officers wear. But if you look at this graph up top, you'll see where we did some testing on the penetrating power of different caliber bullets on our body armor. And what you see in the graph is when the body armor was shot by 9mm ammunition, the vest was able to stop that bullet. And so this would have been a case where if an officer was shot, they would have survived that encounter without much injury. However, when you look at the results when the vests were shot with 5.56 ammunition or 7.62 ammunition, those rounds penetrated right through those vests. And so if this was a case where an officer was shot by this caliber bullet while wearing the soft body armor, it would have seriously injured or possibly been a fatal shot for those officers. So for our officers who work in some of our high-risk units like the Drug Task Force and the Gang Task Force, We provide them with a higher threat level vest, and we also provide them with a rifle plate that goes in and provides an added level of protection for those officers. Now, we'll point out here that a number of our other officers have taken it upon themselves to go out and buy the rifle plate so that they would have that added level of protection. Again, this is something that you'll continue to see requests from me to add to our budget until we can supply all of our officers with strike plates. Of course, our strategic response team, because they go into some very high risk encounters, they have the top of the line, highest threat level body armor and helmets and other equipment, as well as the strike plates. I do want to talk for a minute about some equipment that we have requested. When you recall that we had 163 shootings and 960 plus bullets that were recovered. When we recover this evidence from crime scenes, a tool that we are seeking to acquire is a ballistic identification system. And this allows us to record the unique markings that are placed on a shell casing when a bullet is fired, and compare that against other crime scenes or compare it against guns that we recover so that we can develop links and solve some of these shootings. I'll talk about our vehicle fleet. Let me just remind everyone that our vehicles are not basically used like a regular vehicle, and that they are a mobile office for our officers. Our officers are driving around, responding on calls for service, and inside these vehicles for 10 plus hours each day. They carry a lot of equipment. Some of the equipment we talked about, like ballistic shields and tactical rifles and things like that. And so we prefer vehicles that have a larger capacity. We also require vehicles where we can maintain, or that these vehicles be maintained in top mechanical condition. And this is because we know that at any given minute, they might end up having to engage in emergency response, or they could be involved in a high-speed vehicle pursuit. We currently have 227 vehicles in our fleet. That does not include our specialty vehicles, which I'll talk about in a minute. Our vehicles range in age from vehicles that are 2005 model year all the way up to 2020. And some of the models are you can see on the screen to the right. They are in various models, and currently 61 of our vehicles have surpassed the Athens-Clarke County serviceable life, and they need to be removed out of our fleet. However, we've been approved to replace only 44 of these vehicles. We don't have those 44 vehicles yet. They're on order, but they are delayed due to difficulty getting chips and backlogs in the manufacturing industry caused by COVID-19. So even when those 44 vehicles do arrive, that still leaves us with 17 vehicles that are beyond their serviceable life. And even more troubling is over the next 2 years, 75 additional vehicles will surpass their serviceable life. And so we will continue to make requests to replace these vehicles so that we can have mechanically sound, up-to-date vehicles that we can provide to our officers. Certainly, things that when we're considering these vehicles or acquiring new vehicles, we want to think about fuel efficiency and cost savings. But first and foremost, we want to consider safety and security and operational effectiveness and efficiency. And so I'd like to focus on safety and security technology. And I really want to spend a second talking about this word pursuit rated, which we've had discussion over before, but it's really misleading. It leads people to believe that we're looking for these vehicles simply because they can drive fast and catch people in a pursuit. Really, what these vehicles provide is an industry standard, a law enforcement industry standard vehicle that has special features that make these vehicles more safe for the officer, more safe for other drivers, and more safe for the community that they're being operated in. So they come with things like 75-mile-an-hour rear impact crash ratings, reinforced framework, heavy-duty steering suspension, suspension that's more responsive, added space and for in the passenger compartment, enhanced anti-lock braking systems, stronger steel wheels, and calibrated all-wheel drive systems. Now, I want to especially focus on the reinforced framework. That's depicted in this picture in the area that's highlighted in yellow. And so why is that important? I think one incident that occurred here last summer that involved one of our officers, Sergeant Paul Davidson, illustrates the importance of this pursuit-rated vehicle. His vehicle was stopped. It wasn't pursuing. It was stopped, but it was at a location waiting on a vehicle that was being pursued out of a neighboring jurisdiction. And when that vehicle arrived at that location, it careened out of control and crashed on top of Sergeant Davidson's vehicle. Now, if you look at the photo on the bottom left, you'll see that although this was a terrible accident and the vehicle was badly mangled, that yellow area that we talked about earlier, which was reinforced by steel in this pursuit-rated vehicle, essentially saved the officer's life. And thanks to that pursuit rating, Sergeant Paul Davidson, one of our heroes, is still here with us today. We have motorcycles in our fleet. We have 10 of them. They're Harley-Davidson motorcycles. We utilize them because they're more fuel efficient and they're more maneuverable and more efficient at dealing with traffic control and traffic enforcement. We do have a mobile command center that was acquired in 2005 through a grant. It is a regional public safety asset, which allows us to have in-field incident command. It also serves as a backup mobile 911 center. This vehicle is approaching 20 years old and is approaching the end of its serviceable life. And so this is something that you'll see us looking to either identify grant funding for or to budget for in our capital budget. You need only consider the Freddie Gray incident that occurred in Baltimore, Maryland, to understand the value and necessity of a prisoner transport van. This is a vehicle that allows for safe and efficient transportation of multiple arrested individuals. It has individual security compartments in the back of it. It has a system of seat belting and restraining so that people are secure in the back of this vehicle. And it has a camera system for monitoring those people while they're in the vehicle and in transport to the jail. We talked about the mini drones earlier, but we also have regular drones. And these drones are very effective and very efficient at searching, especially in large areas. They also add additional safety for our officers where they can deliver a message or look at a scene where an individual armed with a gun or some type of weapon is, and they don't have to get so close to that individual. We have 6 multi-purpose canine teams, and they are very effective because, as we know, the canines have a sense of smell that's about 100 times that of a human being. And so they're very effective at finding lost or stolen articles. They're very effective at searching for missing children, missing elderly adults, or for wanted people. They can clear a building much more quickly and much more efficiently than regular police officers, and their sense of smell allows them to identify or locate narcotics and dangerous drugs. One added benefits to our canine is the community engagement benefit. All of our dogs are bred to be sociable and to be able to interact with the public, and so we have them out at schools and events out in the community, and they've proven to be an important community engagement tool. Other equipment includes our mobile data terminals. These are computers that in all of our vehicles. They allow our officers to communicate, receive and send information, write reports, and makes them more efficient at the job that they do. We have mountain bikes or bicycles in our department, and our officers use these for our greenways and on our bike paths and in downtown to get around. We have a public safety camera system that includes a number of cameras that helps us monitor real-time parades, which we'll probably be having one this weekend, parades and large-scale events like football games, and also allow us to go back after a crime has been committed to see if we can identify suspects or evidence to help solve those crimes. We have a long-range acoustic device, or LRAD, and this is essentially a large, it's a large loudspeaker that communicates at a very high decimal level, so we can communicate at a person who may be far away from us, or we can communicate with large crowds and in noisy environments and ensure that our message is both delivered and received by the individuals that we're trying to communicate with. So that was a lot of information that I went through. I do want to point out that our most valuable resource and our most valuable tool is our people. And so we recognize the need to acknowledge and be mindful about ensuring that we don't become overly militarized or even give that appearance. But we also realize and want to be mindful of the need to ensure that our officers have the tools and equipment that they need to do the very dangerous job that we're asking them to do. That concludes my presentation. So at this time, I don't know whether Sheriff Williams wants to add something, or we want to just take questions. Sheriff Williams, would you like to add anything?
Yeah, I'd love to just quickly say a few things here. First of all, thank you, Chief Spruill, for allowing me this time during your presentation, and Manager Williams, Mr. Mayor, all the commissioners, thank you for allowing me some time here. It's much appreciated. And I just want to focus on, there are a lot of similarities between the equipment that the police department uses and those that the sheriff's office does. Sometimes it's falls by the wayside. The sheriff is responsible for many things that are similar to what the police do every day. We have to serve warrants, be it criminal or civil. We have to do evictions. I know everybody says boo, but constitutionally it does have to happen. I agree that there's some situations that we need to work through so that they don't happen as frequently and that we offer people assistance too. But when it comes down to it, we have an order and we have to do those things, and people aren't happy. So those are inherently dangerous situations. You go to put somebody out of their house, you pick somebody up on a warrant, or even if you're serving somebody a notice saying, hey, they're behind on some payments, or somebody suing them and you're going to have to take some of their property as a result. So the OC spray, the handcuffs, people don't think about them as being a defensive weapon, but a lot of times that just helps us to safely transport people without having to worry about not only them fleeing, but also hurting themselves or hurting someone else in those situations. Let me bring your attention just to kind of the jail environment, a thing that people don't often consider. Day to day, a patrol officer or a deputy on the road faces inherent dangers, and there's always guns and things of that nature to consider. In a jail, you do not have the luxury sometimes of being able to create that space and that distance to make it safe for everybody else. Sometimes we have one deputy in a unit with up to 70 people. And if a fight breaks out in there, if you've been to the jail, there's going to be a good amount of time before another deputy can get to that person to help out, especially with our staffing levels being as low as they are. So it's essential that we have tools such as tasers, ways to de-escalate situations and limit harm. I'll just point out to you that I didn't have quite enough time to put together a full presentation as Chief Spruill. Only had a couple of days notice that this was coming. Again, I'm still glad that I'm here to be able to speak. but we have one lieutenant, we have 2 deputies, and a detention officer who are out and not able to help our staff because of incidents within the jail cell where they had to struggle with individuals and had finger injuries. So something as simple as a broken pinky can have one of our officers out for 8 weeks. And that's a further hit on our staffing levels. And the lower our staffing goes, it's unsafe for everybody. My deputies, my detention officers, the inmates, all the vendors that we have coming in and out. And lastly, I just want to also point out that we have some of the weapons that we have that are in the jail. People assume just because you pat down people, folks can't hurt you when they're in the jail. That is not true. People get very creative. They can create shanks. They can create things out of soap. We give them soap. They can buy soap, but they can turn those into weapons to use against us. Ultimately, I hope you would be surprised to know that quite frequently we have our deputies in units when people get upset. They collect, and be it in a champagne bottle or a small bag or whatever means, urine and feces, and they routinely throw these things on our deputies. That's unacceptable. And as a result, our deputies have to, contain themselves, and they have to find a way to de-escalate it without seriously hurting somebody. A lot of these tools speak to those ends. We have to have some of these tools in order to not just always have to go hands-on, to be physically combative with people. In a nutshell, I just want to reiterate a lot of the things that Chief Spruill said. It is about safety. We do have to have multiple tools to address situations, and you never know which one is going to be the best. So that's why you do have to have different options when it comes down to it. That's all I wanted to add to this, and I look forward to hopefully being able to come before you and tell you a little bit about some of the equipment we have or that we might need that might help us in our jobs. But it's also about a partnership. We really have to understand every level of public safety, the police, the sheriff's office. We talked earlier to some judges and the public defenders. We all really need to work together. And part of that is just having this understanding that it is a team effort. And sometimes even when it doesn't look the way that you would want it to look, that doesn't make it wrong, but it does mean that we can come together and have conversations to try to figure out how to make it better. Thank you. I'll stay around for questions if y'all have stuff for me as well.
Thank you, Sheriff Williams. And again, thank you, Chief Spruill. I know a couple commissioners had questions they wanted to follow up on. I'll begin with Commissioner Link.
Yeah, thank you all for this presentation. It's been extremely informative, and I've been jotting down questions throughout. I wanted to start with questions about guns. And you went through the kinds of guns that y'all face out in the community. And I know there have been a lot of arrests recently with these gang operations and a lot of weapons seized. Are you able to trace those weapons or determine where these folks are getting these weapons? Because from what I understand, most of them have previous convictions and shouldn't be allowed to own firearms. And I know that there are guns that are stolen. I know of, I think, at least 3 incidents where AK-47s have been stolen out of vehicles. Can you give some idea as to where these folks who are priorly convicted criminals are getting their weapons?
Sure. So there's a variety of places that they're getting from. One of the most popular places that they get them from is stealing them out of vehicles. There's not a week that goes by here in Athens-Clarke County where a gun is not stolen out of a car. We've had multiple guns, shotguns stolen out of cars. Oftentimes they're stolen from cars where the people don't even bother to lock the door on their vehicle. And so we've talked with a number of activist groups who have been trying to push for legislation that would encourage responsible gun ownership. I mean, if you have a gun and you leave it where a child can get it and that child ends up picking it up and killing or injuring themselves or someone else, then you would be held negligent. You could be prosecuted for that. But on a daily basis, we have people leaving guns in cars, unlocked, making them available, and these people are stealing them and then using them on the street to injure or kill other people. We also see where, in some cases, they'll do what's called a straw purchase, where another individual who can legally buy a gun will buy the gun for them and then give it to them. Of course, that's against the law. And when we can prove that, then we will, prosecute those individuals for those kind of straw purchases. And then finally, there's a gun trade on the streets, just like there's a drug trade on the streets. And so people can go out into the streets and relatively easily purchase a gun without much effort at all. So they're coming from a variety of different locations. That's a great question, and I hope that answers your question.
It does, and I kind of have a follow-up question, and my concern is to do with this proposal that the legislature is going to pass a concealed, non-permit concealed carry law, state law. How do you react to that in the field when you're approaching someone who you know is a suspect, and knowing that they, don't need a permit to carry a weapon, and you find a weapon on them and they may not be violating any law because there's no need for a permit? Are the police of this state going to offer any input to the legislators about?
Well, certainly we would be concerned and we would be opposed to legislation that does that, but we have to follow the law.
Yeah.
And if that's the law, then we would have to deal with it. I can tell you we do a tremendous amount of training to teach our officers how to deal with people who are armed, and that includes training that teaches our officers how to deal with people who may lawfully be carrying a firearm. But it does make our job a whole lot more difficult because sometimes we'll have, about a split second to make a determination on whether this is a threat to our lives or whether this is someone who's legally carrying that weapon, and getting it wrong could mean the difference between life and death.
You also mentioned the ballistic identification. There's the one slide that has the computer screen image on it. Is that equipment that we already have, where we're able to identify the source of a weapon from which a bullet is fired?
So the technology already exists. ATF and GBI has the technology. But what happens now is when we collect these rounds, we have to transport them to the GBI or ATF lab, and our evidence gets in line behind every other shooting or every other incident all across the state or all across the nation. And it might be weeks or months before we even get that comparison. With the number of shootings that we're having, what this will do if we get this technology here is it will allow us in real time, within a matter of hours or days, to link some of this gun evidence to be able to say, this gun was used in this shooting, and this gun was, we might recover the shell casings at one location, recover, stop a person with a gun at another, match those two up, and be able to go back and charge that individual. So it's a extremely useful tool in helping us develop leads to solve some of these cases. The answer to your question is yes, the technology exists, but it's the difference between us having to wait weeks and months versus us being able to, get these leads and information, in a couple of days.
Yeah, I've been aware of the technology for decades, but I would assume that it's advanced and become a lot more accessible in recent years with laser technology and things like that being almost desktop accessible. I am interested in that. I had a quick question about vehicles. We talk about these SUV vehicles versus the sedan vehicles, and the need for these vehicles to be pursuit ready and reinforced and all that. Is there any difference between a sedan that has all those reinforcements and an SUV that has all those reinforcements, regardless of whether or not they're available? from what all the research I've done, safety wise, drivability wise, view shed wise, sedans and lower vehicles are safer. Do they make those sedans in the hybrid models in that pursuit rating? Because from what I understand, NYPD is about to buy a bunch of Teslas that meet those qualifications.
Yeah, and so they do have sedans that are pursuit rated and that meet those specifications. They are available there. And so any pursuit rated vehicle is better than a non-pursuit rated vehicle for us. And so, we would certainly take the sedans. There's different studies and research that, some will say that it's safer for the driver and the officer in sedans. Some will say that they're safer in the SUVs. And so there's pros and cons to both. And so either one is preferable over a non-pursuit rated vehicle. I can tell you though, also, if you see the ballistic shields and the tactical rifle and the mobile data terminal that goes in the vehicle, I believe the mayor rode along with us here not too long ago, and I think he can attest for how cramped it is inside of that vehicle and how dangerous it would be if an airbag deployed with that in that sedan when that thing is sitting that close to them. So SUV is sufficient if that's the best we can do, but our preference is for a larger vehicle that we feel makes our officers safer and that allows us the extra capacity to carry some of the tools and equipment that we need to have when we're out on the street. I don't know if Chief Kelly had something to add there.
Absolutely, Chief. This is Deputy Chief Kelly. I did want to add to that. So the vehicles we're purchasing now are the Ford Utilities, which is the SUV. Ford's no longer making the sedan, which is what we were previously purchasing. The only pursuit rated sedan that's on the market at this time is the Dodge Charger. However, it's not hybrid. The only hybrid vehicle is the Ford SUV that we're purchasing. With regards to NYPD, they're actually trying out a new vehicle produced by Ford. It's the Mustang Mach-E. They've come out with a pursuit-rated version, and it's all electric. It's passed the Michigan tests, Michigan State Police tests, which set a lot of standards for pursuit-rated vehicles, and NYPD is just now testing those. So it's a Ford product that they've employed.
Oh, so they've not gone with the Tesla? Because I read an article just like 3 weeks ago or so about this Tesla purchase.
Not familiar with the Tesla purchase. I do know that they had 150 odd Mach-E's that they were purchasing and testing in New York.
Well, let me also add that each year we go to different conferences and we see technologies, and so there's a lot of technology out there. There are other sedans that they're manufacturing, maybe in a one at a time, and they can provide that technology to us, but we don't want to get in during the beta testing phase of these vehicles and get 10 of them in our fleet and realize that they've got certain problems or that they don't meet the standard that we want. So the reputable vehicles that are available, as the Chief mentioned, are the Ford SUVs.
Right. Thanks for that. And I appreciate you highlighting just the prominence of weapons on the street. I think nationwide that's been recognized
really
as an enormous challenge for you and your colleagues across the country. I've got Patrick up next.
Just bear with me. I know that Blaine said no insulting staff, but I do want to just say to the Alabama fan in the room, how about them dogs? Okay. And hopefully this will be our last work session that we'll have with our police department. I do have a series of questions about cost, and some issues with some question about the equipment. So on the standard duty equipment belt, of all those items, what is mostly used? Because I think the public perception is going to be the gun, but if I'm incorrect,
I think public. If that's the public perception, that's very wrong. We rarely use a gun. Most police officers go through their entire career and never have to discharge their vehicle, their gun, aside from when they are at the range qualifying or when they're practicing. We track every time an officer takes their gun out and points it at an individual, because that's considered for us a use of force. And so we track that, and those numbers are very low as well. You asked what the most frequently used tools that our officers have. First, let me start by saying I told you that our most valuable tool is the officer themselves. And so the tool that they use most is their mouths, interpersonal communication skills, and de-escalation skills. So I know you're looking for hard equipment, not necessarily that, but I do want to point out that many bad incidents are avoided, and we're able to solve the vast majority of those 100,000 calls for service that we go on just through interpersonal communication skills. I would say, our officers, if you're talking about regular equipment that we use, as far as force equipment, our taser is probably used over other force options, and that is because of its success rate. As I said before, a baton, a striking instrument, or even the OC spray, there are some disadvantages to them, because if you get somebody that's particularly strong or can stand pain, with the cayenne pepper, remember, it's just pepper. So if you have a person who all throughout their life has been exposed to hot pepper and they eat hot foods all their life, it's not going to affect them like it would another person. So the taser, because it's an involuntary reaction that the person can't control, it has been much more successful at disabling people much more quickly, and that's why our officers prefer to use that. Also, when we use OC spray, after they spray that cloud and the person's moving around, our officers might get caught up in the cloud and be exposed to some of that spray as well. But I think the taser would be the tool that I would say, if we're talking about a force option, that's the one that we use the most.
And I do have a couple more questions, so just bear with me. And it mostly deal with cost. The mobile command center is nearing its end of life. How much does that cost? How much does the ballistic identification system fully, so we don't have to go to GBI or ATF? How much would that cost? And why are officers buying their own equipment? What would that cost? And if you could just give me just a brief, how much all those cost? And when is the Lenco mostly used? Is it used for like big events or like game, whatever? But so when is the Lenco mostly used, and the cost of those equipment?
And if some of those costs are things that you just need to assemble, Chief, by all means, just email that to us after this gathering.
I believe we have all the information. We kind of anticipated that there would be an interest in knowing some of these things. Let me say that we did not pay for the incident command vehicle. It was bought in 2005, but it was bought through grant funding, and so we didn't pay for that. I believe it cost in the neighborhood of $300,000 at that time. However, as technology evolves, as vehicles evolve, that technology is much more expensive nowadays. I would say that we're looking at a cost of between $500,000 and $750,000 to replace that vehicle. And that's mainly because of a lot of the technology and things that are on the vehicle, not just the vehicle. A quick, good example is if you are running this thing on a diesel engine, it's very noisy. And so inside the vehicle, you can't hear what's going on unless you get a run quiet diesel engine, which has an added cost to it. So between $500,000 and $750,000 would be the cost of that vehicle. You asked the question of why are our people buying their own equipment? Because they want to be safe. They want to be as safe as possible. And if we can't get it through budgeted items or through the regular funding, I wouldn't, as a police chief, tell them, no, you can't use the equipment simply because we won't buy it for you. If it's going to provide an added level of protection for our officers, and they want to pay their own money for it, then I just don't see a problem with allowing them to do that. I'd prefer if we budgeted it and we were able to acquire those things. But I think it's reasonable, even with the rifles. I wish my technology had worked on on the video we were trying to show, because they shot 25 rounds into a house that was occupied by people. One of the weapons that they used was shooting a 7.62 ammunition. That's bigger than anything that the police even carry. And so officers are saying, well, look, if I can't get a tactical rifle from Athens-Clarke County, I've got to go out and spend the money to get that myself, because these are the things that I might have to respond to. And I don't know if I've answered all the questions. I see Deputy Chief Daniel here. Did you have anything to add there, Chief Daniel?
Yes, sir. Again, this is Harrison Daniel. So just specifically to your question about the cost, the Daniel Defense rifle, for example, those run about $1,200 to $1,300 a piece. The rifle plates, which is some of the additional ballistic armor, those are going to run anywhere from $400 plus a plate, and there's a front and a rear plate to those typically in most systems, and that doesn't even include the carrier that's used to actually hold the plates themselves. And so I really wanted to point those numbers out, and specifically to say that our officers are willing to spend thousands of their own dollars to buy this equipment if it's not provided for them. So that really, what that conveys to me is how important that equipment is to them and to their perception of safety and the reality of their safety when they're responding to calls in the street.
Thanks, Deputy Chief. Is that everything, Patrick?
One more, just the ballistic identification system, just a rough, off the top of your head estimate.
I'll let Chief Daniel handle that one. I think it's about $250,000, but Chief Daniel.
Yes, sir, that's about right. We have it quoted at just over $207,000.
Great, thanks for that. Go ahead, Carol.
Chief, first of all, just thanks for this. It was like very helpful. Brings me back to that Citizen Police Academy that I learned so much in last year. I wanted to ask you, I assume that you have some systems of control that are a regular part of the administration and management that you have. I mean, last week or a couple of weeks ago, Commissioner Houle and I were talking to the police chief, who was reviewing with us how there has to be this oversight of how the EMTs are working and the kind of equipments they're using with medical emergencies. And I think I remember you all having talked about how you review the use of force, these different incidents. Could you kind of give us a little bit of an overview of what that process is, or how often it goes on, and how different officers are involved with that?
Sure. And that's an excellent question. First, all of that information is captured. Every time a use of force takes place, every time an officer points a gun at someone, that information is documented, it's tracked, it's available. We're looking forward to sharing that information with the Citizen Advisory Board because we want to be transparent. In fact, if you went tonight to our transparency website online, that information is there. What happens is every time that an officer, we do have some forms for like OC spray and low-level uses of force, where the officers will fill those forms out. It's reviewed by a supervisor, and every use of force moves its way up the chain of command and is looked at by everyone in that chain of command all the way to the level of deputy chief. Certain uses of force, like a use of deadly force, will come through me and I will look at it to ensure that it's proper and appropriate. We look at not only whether it was legally properly and appropriate, and we want to know whether it's consistent with our policies and practices. And then we also look at it to see whether or not there's any training, additional training that might be needed, whether there's other tools or equipment that we can give to our officers to help them deal with that same type situation were it to occur again. We track whether we are having more incidences of use of force or less incidences of use of force. I think I was looking at numbers earlier today, and in 2020, we had just over 200 use of force incidents, where in 2018 and 2019, we were pushing almost to 300 use of forces in the year. So we look at whether those use of forces are going down. We constantly are pushing de-escalation and other interpersonal communication skills and training to get our officers to be, we want our officers to have these tools. We want them to know that they can use force when it's necessary and when it's legally justified, but we want them to, as much as possible, to avoid it wherever they can.
Yeah, that helps a lot, makes sense. And this may be a question where you say, if only we had time to do that. But are there any kind of formal or informal, I imagine it's done informally, but sort of formal from the top down arenas that encourage officers to work through difficult situations together?
Oh yeah, and you actually, the commission actually approved some scenario-based training for us that's going to be coming soon. We have, I think you saw our firearm simulator machine where we actually put people in different scenarios to make sure that they're responding and reacting the way that we would have them or want them to respond and react in those kinds of situations. So we have live ongoing training, regular ongoing training to teach our officers. Another thing that we have done here recently is every time that we see an event that is a large scale event nationally. So let's take the incident in Rochester, New York, where they used a spit sock and the individual died. Every time we have a case like that, we will convene, and we call it Monday morning quarterbacking, but it's basically, it is a review session where we bring in our command staff, our use of force subject matter experts, line officers from the field, and we bring them all into a room where we can sit down and we go over the case. And the questions that we ask are, okay, could that happen here in Athens-Clarke County? If it couldn't, why wouldn't it happen here in Athens? What policies, what training, what tools do we have that would prevent it? If it could happen here in Athens-Clarke County, what can we do to ensure that it does not happen here? Do we need to do more training? Do we need to acquire more equipment? What can we do to avoid that? So we're constantly training. I didn't talk a lot about training today because this was focused on the tools, but that training piece can't be overstated.
Chief, I have one thing, if I may. Since we were discussing training and use of force, I did want to point out that in 2020, our officers did receive approximately 10,000 hours in total of training related to use of force and or de-escalation. And the breakdown of that between the two, between training that's specifically designed for the application of force and then training that's designed to be de-escalation, 65% of those 10,000 hours was de-escalation training. So the bulk of our training in those cases is going toward de-escalation, not the actual application of force.
Thanks for that, Deputy Chief. Carol, do you have any follow-up?
That was just great. Just wanted to say thank you for that.
Great. Go ahead, Tim.
And thank you, Chief Spruill, Chief Daniel, Williams, for being here with us tonight and giving the presentation. I appreciate it. Just a few questions on which y'all went over. One of the things I said, the tactical rifles that was brought up. How often are those implemented, that tactical rifles are actually utilized?
So our tactical rifles, our officers are allowed to deploy them, which means bring them out of their vehicles anytime that they respond on a gun call. So if a person has a gun, then they're authorized to have a tactical rifle with them. And that may seem a little odd, but we don't want it to be a fair fight. If a person comes with a handgun, then we want to have a higher level of force to convince that person that this is a futile effort and they need to surrender and not escalate. So, and our officers need to be able to protect themselves. So they are authorized when in cases where a person has a weapon, be it a handgun or a rifle.
So I guess like on that's what I'm thinking, that, you know, as I said, like, while we have definitely a concerning number of shootings that have been happening lately, definitely an increase. As it's kind of been going around, it's still a rare response compared to most calls that our police have to respond to. So I guess I'm just wondering, like, does it seem like we need to have a tactical rifle per every officer? Because kind of how we've been going over the scenarios, it doesn't seem like that's necessarily the preparation that we need to have.
Well, what I would argue is that we don't know which one of our officers is going to come across a call where they're confronted with a person who has a high-powered assault rifle. If we could determine which one, I mean, we would, only have to give that person a rifle. As I said earlier, most of our police officers go through their entire career and never have to use a handgun. But my goodness, we don't want to have an officer not armed with that handgun and get into a situation where they absolutely need it and lose their life because they don't have it. And so, I just will remind folks that over the last 3 years since I've been here, we've had officers where they've swung machetes at them, where they've pointed guns at them, and where they've even shot at our officers. And here recently, we've had police officers responding on calls for service in neighboring jurisdictions that were killed in the line of duty. And so we want to make sure, a lot of the equipment, I can see how a layperson might think this may be overkill. But a lot of our equipment is equipment that we need to be prepared for the kinds of incidents. Who could have imagined that a person would have been running around at Walker Park pointing a long gun at women and children? The day before the mass shooting at Mandalay Bay in Las Vegas, or the day before the Pulse nightclub incident, or the day before the Virginia Beach shooting incident, there would have been a lot of people in those jurisdictions that would have said, do we really need Bearcats, or do we really need tactical rifles, or do we really need all of this equipment? But the morning after, I can assure you, everybody was in agreement that they were absolutely glad that they had them. And so with these tactical rifles, we don't know who's going to be the person or the officer that's going to respond on that call where they have to deal with somebody who has a high-powered rifle. And so I think it's necessary for us to make sure that all of our officers who want them, some officers don't want them, but the ones that want them, I think it's imperative that we put them in their hands.
And I appreciate this, and I honestly really appreciate just to be able to have the situation of dialogue. Like on the Walker Park, I mean, if I recall correctly, there was a call in stating that there was an individual with a gun, and the police response was therefore responding to an incident where they knew a weapon was in place. And so I would agree with you that to have that situation where there could be one available. I guess I'm just wondering if we need to have a $1,300 assault rifle for every officer when most of these incidents are being called in so we can respond to it with the appropriate force, as y'all are stating, and I agree with. But in the same way that we don't feel like every officer needs to be driving a Bearcat because that might be necessary. It's kind of a similar thing. Obviously, that's an extreme, but yeah.
And I agree with you. I guess, the dilemma that we face there is, as a police chief, I would rather that my officer have that tool at their disposal and not need it than to need it and not have it. Because if they need it and they don't have it, it could very well result in them losing their life. And so from my perspective, I want to put that tool in their hands.
And I definitely understand that perspective. And I guess and again, not just having the dialogue and trying to find this here. To me, it seems like it's almost trying to find that sweet spot of where you're ensuring that the officers are prepared for what incidents might be there, but then also trying to think of, we've brought up, not wanting to have a police force that looks militarized or overly aggressive and intimidating. And so trying to find that spot there where that's it. And I think back to Chief Spruill, the first time that we had a discussion in City Hall, I think very soon after you came on, we had a nice discussion about the idea of being able to, de-weaponize officers who are in situations where weapons aren't usually necessary. What if they're doing, downtown traffic patrols and events and stuff like that? So I would love for us to be exploring that we actually could push back and try to put into a perspective with the community that, it's not always about intimidation, which, as I sat down with your officers and I understand that that's actually a big part of it, that we don't want that intimidation. We want police to feel approachable. And so trying to find that line.
Well, I think if Tammy Conlon were here right now, she would remind us that we are in the process of putting alternative response teams out on the street. And that's doing exactly what you're talking about, because there's a number of calls for service where I agree we would be better suited to send a non-police response to address those calls for service. And, I'd be eager to figure out how we make sure we do that, where the calls that do require a police response, they get a police response. I think this is a good thing. I think we're heading in that direction, and I'm excited about what art might bring for us. So we're doing that right now.
And I appreciate that. I'm excited too. Just two quick things that hit on. The ballistics identification systems that y'all brought up and Commissioner Davenport put on, I would also be definitely supportive of us trying to get that and have that as something that's available to our officers and to our police force. And building on that, I know there was a bit of chafing and stuff around the drug task force discussion. And a lot of discussion we talked about the need for it was around how connected those things are to illegal guns and the illegal gun traffic that's happening. And so I would love for us to be able to see a focus here in Athens, Northeast Georgia, on an illegal gun task force. That, I think, completely fits where we want to be really focusing on. We understand that those guns are dangerous here, that it's difficult for us to trace them, see where they're coming from, as Commissioner Link brought up. So I love a focus on that, and I could see how the ballistic identification system could be playing into that. Just wanted to make that remark, and I don't know if there's anything that you wanted to say, if she's relatively spaced there, but yeah.
Yeah, let me just point out that we have teamed up with the FBI on a number of cases in there, what they call their VICAT, that's the Violent Crimes Task Force, and they do just that. They're targeting people with guns and who are involved in violent criminal activity. There are some areas where there's an ATF task force. I certainly can look at that and see whether there's an interest in starting something like that here, where we would work with ATF to target illegal handguns. And in other areas, they're called UASI areas. We unfortunately are not in an urban area, a Safe Streets Initiative area, so there's certain tools that we don't have here, but certainly something that's worth exploring. I'm glad you brought that up, because I would like to say that I've heard said a number of times that drugs and guns, they're not the same thing. And we're, and there's some desire to try to separate the two. That's not my experience as a police chief. We know that people who are dealing in drugs inherently possess guns. The courts have accepted that, and that's common knowledge. So as we continue to have these discussions, when we are dealing with people who are dealing in drugs, oftentimes they are going to be armed, and we need to look at it from that perspective.
And I look forward to maybe in the future, sometime on this call, getting into that discussion a little bit more about the policy and about how if you pull the illegality of that trade out, you wouldn't necessarily see those things correlated as much. But that's another discussion that I would love to have that we can do. We can get coffee or something. That'd be great. And the last thing I want to bring was actually for Sheriff Williams, and which I appreciate and respect, like you said, about that part of the sheriff's office role is to be able to serve out evictions, and that is something that is absolutely constitutionally required. I understand that. Just to put a bug out there, as when you brought that up, it made me think for a second. I would love for us to see if we could explore a way that the sheriff's department could be part of the eviction prevention program the ACC has now launched with the magistrate court, so that whenever a sheriff's officer or deputy is serving an eviction, as they are required to do, they could also be passing along information about how that tenant could be entering the eviction prevention program. So just wanted to throw that out there, and maybe something we could explore and dig into.
Yeah, constitutionally, I'd be willing, as long as there's nothing that prevents me from doing it. Well, look, there's some that would argue that I could not, that would technically be me offering advice or services. If that's not the case, I have no problem. We'll put it out there. I have no desire just to go and evict people. That's not my role. It happens. It's unfortunate. I've had family members go through it too. So I'm sympathetic. So, whatever we can do. And if that law changes, hey, we're on board. I follow the Constitution.
I know, and I respect that, and I know you're sympathetic to it, and I appreciate that. Anyways, thanks all y'all for being here and talking with us.
All right, thank you.
Thanks, Tim. I've got Jesse and Allison on tap.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll try to move through a few things here fairly quickly. Thanks to y'all for putting together this presentation and being here. I appreciate that we've had some time to dig into some of the more nuance, so that we're not just talking about everything good or everything bad. I really appreciated the exchange that Commissioner Denson and the chief had there. I'd echo a lot of the remarks there about really trying to disentangle drugs and guns, acknowledging that they absolutely go hand in hand when we're talking about enforcing. I think our focus should be on guns, and our focus should be on violent crime as the thing that we're rooting our pursuit in. So I look forward to finding ways that we can do that more explicitly. But since the focus of today has been on equipment, I'll try to keep my remarks mostly to that. So I guess my first and probably biggest thought/question about equipment is regarding the policies around their use. So I've spent a good bit of time poking around the website, and I really appreciate that we have a police department that posts so many of these policies for the public to view. And from what I could tell, it seemed like the policies tend to specify how the tools are used and maintained, trainings, etc. And they don't seem to specify exclusions of use. And there seems to be, based on my non-expert reading of this, a bit of ambiguity around when certain tools can be used. So a couple of things that came to mind for me just during this discussion are the LRAD was described as a tool for boosting signal when you're trying to communicate in a noisy environment or something. But those devices have also been used as a weapon. And so I'm curious if we have a policy in place, for example, that precludes the use of that tool in a weaponized fashion. And then similarly, another incident that I know we've referenced in past discussions is, when we had in 2018 an officer pursue somebody on foot in a vehicle and hit them. Do we have a policy around the use of vehicles that explicitly prohibits people from using them to strike an individual? And I guess before I go further, I'll just kind of stop there and say, are those policies somewhere on the books and I just missed it, or
yeah,
how does that look?
Absolutely, there is policy. It's out there. It's available for anyone to see if they go to our transparency website. And with regard to, disallowing weapons for certain uses, yes, that's in there. So, for example, we have a policy that says an officer will not shoot at or from a moving vehicle unless someone is threatening the use of deadly force from that vehicle. They must move out of the path of the vehicle if a vehicle is attempting to run them over. They can't stand in front of the vehicle and then use deadly force and say that the vehicle was trying to run them over. We do have a policy in place currently that says that you will not intentionally initiate physical contact between one of our vehicles and a citizen unless deadly force is justified. So if somebody's standing there and they're pointing a gun in the car at one of my officers, do what you got to do. But absent a threat of deadly, immediate, imminent, deadly threat, then they are prohibited from doing that. With regard to the LRAD, no, we do not have a current policy that would permit us from using that as an offensive weapon. That is a tool that our strategic response team uses, and we might have to agree to disagree, but I can think of some, they would be, albeit them unusual, some circumstances where it would be appropriate for us to use it in that manner, and in order for us to avoid a need to use higher levels of force. So if we've got somebody that's about to burn a building down, burn City Hall down, and we can disperse that crowd quickly by utilizing that tool in that circumstance, rather than getting out and trying to engage with a person who might do harm to the officers, or it might be too late for us to prevent them from doing damage to City Hall. I think our officers should have the latitude to use that technology appropriately. We do have certain policies in place that require a specific level of authority before certain tools can be used. So, for example, before our Bearcat, Linco Bearcat, and our SRT team can be utilized, it has to be approved at the level of a captain. So a captain would have to, and that's primarily because oftentimes we will leave a captain as the duty officer in charge of the entire county, and we have to make sure that they have the ability to use the tools that are available to them. But when you look at it, only on 13 occasions did we have those uses. Before we use the Linco Bearcat, we use a we use a threat matrix to see whether it's appropriate for us to call out SWAT and to use these tools. And we take into account, is there a gun present? Has there been a gun used before? Do we have information that says a gun is there? Has this person engaged in violent behavior during past arrests or past interaction with police? We look at things even at, like, when we're doing search warrants, is there a child present? And we take all of those things into account. So there's a lot of policies and there's a lot of rules in place that are restrictive that say if certain things are present, then we won't do it, or we need to adjust our tactics and limit when and how our officers can use force or use the tools that we give them.
Chief, if I might add, again, this is Harrison Daniel. A couple other examples, just real quick, in terms of policy. For example, our taser policy, which is the conducted electrical weapon, has a specific section titled "Prohibited Use," and then lists out a whole series of bullet points prohibiting use during certain circumstances. Same thing during our OC spray. There's also a restrictions on use of OC spray section in that. So there's several other examples. Those are available on our website for the public to view, and if anybody else wants to look at that a little further.
And I think I went through it kind of quickly, but when I talked about the use of force continuum, our policy prohibits our officers from using striking instruments in what we would call a red area, which is the head, and other areas where that will be considered lethal force. There are yellow areas where we, tell them to stay away from those unless it's absolutely necessary. But there's a lot of things written into our policy that does restrict when and how we can use that equipment.
Okay, thanks. I guess this is kind of dovetails with a bit of your remarks, Chief Spruill, but I am thinking about, I got last night on the mind, as I know many do, and I can't help but think of last night versus the summer of 2020. And, we had a large unruly gathering in the streets. There was a lot of damage to public property. We have public workers posting everywhere, begging people to bring back a lot of stolen property. And, by and large, I would say last night, based on video I've seen, seems, quite a bit more unruly than the scale of response and the type of response we saw last summer. And so I guess I'm seeking some clarity here on what precipitates the use of some of these crowd control tools, whether it's the Bearcat, tear gas, etc., such that we've seen kind of the difference between last night and last summer.
Well, let me say first, thank you for bringing that up, because I think that's an excellent example, and there's a lot to learn from that. First, let me say that, we've provided a detailed report on what occurred. The Solicitor General has come back behind that. And our report acknowledged that although our actions were lawfully appropriate, we could have done better. We made some mistakes. Since that point, we've looked very hard at the equipment we have, what our training is, what our policies are, to try to avoid making some of those same mistakes again. The reason why I'm glad you bring that scenario up is because it's a prime example of what happens when a police department does not have the equipment and the training that's necessary to deal with the types of incidents that they're responsible for responding to. As I said, and I'm not placing fault on anybody, when I got here, we had no civil response unit, we had no equipment, and we had no ability to deal with an incident like that. And so we were using tools that, in hindsight, if I had that same situation today, I probably wouldn't roll out some of the equipment that we rolled out back then, because we have the equipment now, proper equipment, and we have people that are trained to deal with something like that. And so that is a prime example of why we need to make sure we have the equipment, tools, and training to deal with the kinds of scenarios that we have, because when we don't, we are going to make mistakes. I would love to have May 30th back again to be able to do it over again, because, as a police chief, my goal is to use the least amount of force necessary, and it's never a good thing when we have to use force against our citizens. And so I'd love the opportunity to change those things back on that date, and certainly want to have taken steps since then to try to avoid something like that happening again. But we have to, the consequences of not giving our officers the tools that they need to do the job that they need to do can result to incidents like that, where we have consequences that nobody is happy with.
Thanks. I have one more question, and then we'll share a couple thoughts. So my third and final question, I guess, is the drones. Fascinating, the footage of the drone going in the house and everything. And I'm just curious what the warrant procedures are there. I mean, the specific example you cited makes a lot of sense to me, right? Like sending someone into a house where we know they're armed and they're using their gun. You can send a robot in instead of a human. That sounds great. But it also opens this creepy can of worms in my mind of all these sci-fi movies where you have robots flying into people's houses. And so I'm hoping that you can kind of clarify what policies we have in place that govern when and how drones can be used, especially on private property or in pursuit of individuals.
Kind of due process concerns, Commissioner.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yeah, what I would say is anywhere that a law enforcement officer would be lawfully allowed to go, then our drone is part of our equipment and part of us, and it would be allowed there. And so there's case law that allows us to use a drone in those kinds of circumstances. And I think they do address the due process issue. Now, what I would say to you is this is critical technology. If you think about the Breonna Taylor case, in the Breonna Taylor case, and I don't want to criticize any other law enforcement agency, But I do want to say that we're doing now, we're using tactics now that allow us to avoid what occurred in that case. Because in that case, when they hit the door, they executed the search warrant, they knocked the door open, and then they were in what we call the fatal funnel. When you're standing in that door and you're right at the other end. So if there's a deadly threat coming out of that location, you're right in the path. And obviously, if bullets come at you, you're going to return fire. Where now, and here recently, I have drone footage, but we only had a limited amount of time tonight. I have drone footage where we did a search warrant at one of the houses of a gang member who was armed and dangerous. And what we did was we hit that door. And once we hit that door, our people backed away, announced that we're the police, we've got a search warrant, come out with your hands up. And when he didn't, instead of officers with guns going in, we sent a drone in. And that drone was able to fly around and figure out where the person was, what dangers, if any, existed inside of that house, and we were able to resolve that. Without that technology, we may have been in a Breonna Taylor type scenario. And so just the drone technology is critically important. Also, when we have missing people or missing children or elderly adults that wander off in some of the heavily wooded areas around here, they can search that area because of they can search a larger area, and they have a heat sensing, a thermal imaging capability, so they can be much more efficient. So this is a critical tool for us. And yes, we are mindful of due process and making sure that we're not, infringing on anybody's rights. But when and where it is appropriate, we do use that technology.
Thank you, Chief. Well, my parting thoughts, primarily for colleagues, but I guess for everyone, this was very informative. Some of the stuff here makes a lot of sense to me and compels me to support further investment in ways that you're looking for. There were a few things that, to be quite honest, I found troubling. For example, I support the ballistic identification system. That makes a lot of sense to me. I was real pleased to hear that statistic that 65% of our use of force training is really around de-escalation as we seek to invest further in things like the alternative response teams and our co-responder units. Those are all things that I'm excited to get behind. Less excited about things like the tactical rifles. When we talk about the militarization of police, I think a tactical assault rifle epitomizes that in my mind. So, overarchingly, my two big takeaways for colleagues here, as we're getting into budget season, is I'd like for us to think about what are the costs of the tools that we give our public safety officers and departments generally, considering the indirect costs and externalities and not just the obvious costs of maintenance and replacement and insurance, but also the medical costs and legal costs that can arise from the use of these tools. There's limits in our budget, and so differing investments yield differing spectrums of possibility for the future is kind of how I think about it, right? So the more we invest in things like alternative response teams and de-escalation, I think we widen that spectrum of possible outcomes where situations that are risky resolve in a way where no one gets hurt and maybe fewer people are incarcerated. The more we invest in tactical weaponry, I think the more we make Athens-Clarke County look like a combat zone. And that's not to say that we can do entirely one or the other, because we have to acknowledge the reality that there are people with guns and bad intentions out there, or people with weapons who are out of control for whatever reason or another, and our officers are tasked with meeting those really risky situations. So I don't want to gloss over that, but I do think that broadly speaking, when we're talking about where to move money in the budget, it's these alternatives that I'm really excited about. And so I'd like for us to think more about the alternatives to approaching public safety with our funding and with policies, so that we might be able to make some of these tools more a thing of the past, less necessary over time. So that's my meandering 6 hours into a meeting best attempt at trying to articulate where I'd like to see us go from here. But thanks for your time, y'all.
Mr. Mayor, one comment, if I may.
Please.
And so I recognize that we have a limited amount of funds, and we can't get everything that we need. But I think we really need to do that cost benefit analysis. How much does a human life, how much does our officers how much do we value our officers' lives at? And, how much is the lives of some of these citizens that we're protecting from people who are intending to do them harm with these kinds of weapons? What's the value on that? I don't know that you can put a specific value on it, but again, like I mentioned earlier, the day after an incident occurred, everybody realizes and understands the value of the weapons and the protective equipment and the tools that we use. And so we need to look at it. I would recommend that we continue to look at it from a worst case scenario, and we answer the question, how much is a human life worth? That's the question that we're asking there. My job is to keep my officers alive, give them the tools that they need to deal with these armed violent situations and to survive through them.
Right. I've got Commissioner Wright.
Hey, thank you. I want to thank everybody for the information that was presented and information shared. It's a good discussion. I wanted to focus my interest in learning about the K-9 team. Chief Spruill, I appreciate it. I think the last time we met, we had 3 teams, and now we have 6. And I guess if you guys will put me on your list for the Citizens Academy when that happens, I would like to meet those K-9 officers and learn a little bit more about that team.
3 of them are still in the process of acquisition and training and everything, but I'd love to do that. We expanded that unit after we saw the great successes that we were getting out of our first 3 K-9s. Those dogs were recovering property, finding missing people, finding felons who were fleeing from the department. But the biggest piece was the community engagement piece, where they were really, paying great dividends out in the community, interacting with citizens in the community. And I think over the course, I'll have to ask one of my deputy chiefs if they have the numbers, but I think we've had them for about 3 years now, 2 or 3 years now. And I think we may have had 3 bites, cases where a dog had to actually bite an individual. And those were in cases, one was the case I was telling you where we put the drone in after we executed the search warrant. An individual jumped out of the 3rd story of his apartment and was fleeing from officers, and he was bitten in that case. But very rarely are they used to apply force through bites, and more so their sense of smell is what we're relying on with that tool.
Well, I think it's perfect for our community to have dogs on the team. So the other part being that I know there's choices when you're shopping for that type of breed for the working K-9, and I want to applaud you for getting the type that is giving you that community engagement factor, because it's my understanding they don't always have that trait along with their other police traits. So thank you again for that choice.
Well, thank you. And I will say that many law enforcement agencies, they don't look for that. They want a more aggressive dog. They call it drive, and that's what they're looking for. But we specifically are looking for dogs that are bred and trained to be more sociable. And so on our first round, we went up, had officers go and look at the dogs and watch them as they were interacting with people. And of the first 3 that they showed us, 2 of them were suitable, but one of them we said, he may be a little bit too aggressive, and we, asked and looked for another dog. So we're being very careful to make sure that they are sociable and they can interact out in the community.
Thank you again. Mr. Mayor, that was the extent of what I wanted to focus on. Thanks.
Thanks. Saw a K-9 member of Commissioner Link's household heard the conversation and wanted to make availability.
We can sign him up.
Got Avita, and then back to Patrick.
Thank you, Chief Spruill. That presentation was very detailed. And I know that Commissioner Myers has gone through the police academy. Am I the only commissioner that has not? And if so, I would like to also sign up. I think Commissioner Wright mentioned that, but I do think I don't think we got the whole picture, and maybe I feel now that I've missed something since we've had this much conversation. So I also would be interested for the next sign up for the police academy. And if you're looking for a dog, there's a dog named Luke that you could come and get. But I don't know I don't know what he can smell, but he'll pull you around. So, but yeah, I think that's a good idea for me.
Okay.
Thank you again.
Yes, ma'am. And we will continue to push information out through the manager's office when we have not just the Citizens Academy, but other training that we're doing where you can come through it. And I think the sheriff has some training that's coming up in the near future. Sheriff Williams, did you want to mention that?
Yeah, just I know it's been done in the past, but we're kind of revamping. So we want to invite you all when the time comes to come through the Sheriff's Academy too. We're trying to work out, how many weeks and what night it's going to be as well. But we want y'all to get a thorough understanding of what we do, both at the courthouse with security, transporting juveniles, dealing with mental health transports, and also day-to-day operations at the jail. So be ready, because we'll actually put you out at the jail. We won't just leave you there, but we'll give you a thorough understanding, not just like a quick in and out. Again, when I was an officer, I transported a lot of people. When those doors closed behind me, I felt a certain way, knowing that I was going to be coming out. It's important to understand not just what our deputies and detention officers go through, but to also understand the inmates and from their point of view, and the extreme safety measures that we take to make sure, from COVID and everything else that we have going on, that everybody's as safe as possible.
Thanks, Sheriff. We really appreciate that invitation. I'm going to circle back to Patrick.
Just one quick question to Chief Spruill, and thank you. Well, first of all, thank everybody for being here. How do I sign up for the police ride along? Y'all can email, text, or call. That'd be great.
Yeah, so because you all are public officials, I think the appropriate way that would take place is if you let the manager know that you want to do it. He will coordinate with us. We'll work out some dates when you're available, and we'll work it out. But I do, we want to have a standing invitation to any of the commissioners to come on ride-alongs, or to come to any of our training that we have available. But we want to go through the proper process, which would be routed through the manager's office.
And I do encourage everybody on the call, commissioners, to spend some time doing a ride along. You really figure out what the cadence of a shift feels like, and also about sort of the physicality of all the spaces. Being inside, a relatively small vehicle with a lot of equipment sort of encumbered around you. Stopping at public incidents where there may be some question as to what's underway. Just hanging out and engaging with an officer, in every day, just meet and greet, kind of hello public situations. So please do that. I think you learn a lot about the nature of the work, and I'll say, Chief and Sheriff Williams and deputy chiefs as well. I want to thank all of you, because a great value in this is for us and for viewers and our constituents as lay people to learn more about the nuances of your work, and simultaneously for us to be able to bring you some of these questions that we have, wanting to do a better job understanding the many layers of what happens in public safety and throughout the community beyond public safety, and I appreciate your openness to having these conversations. We obviously have been in a day and time when conversations around policing and public safety are not easy ones, and they're fraught. And I think the best thing about the Clarke County community is our willingness to engage in dialogue. So this is very valuable. I know Commissioner Edwards had a question as well. Go ahead and turn it over to you, Commissioner.
Thanks. Chief and Sheriff, I wanted to know, how well vaccination is going among your staff. I'm concerned about keeping our police force healthy and out on the job. And I know that we've certainly had some COVID exposure. So if you could answer that for me, I'd appreciate it. Thanks.
So what I'll tell you is, you know, we do have a significant number of employees who have been affected by COVID and been out. Unfortunately, because of HIPAA rules, they don't share all the information, or we're not at liberty to share, you know, specific information. I think that the manager and the manager's office has information on just specific numbers that they can share, maybe not tonight, but at some point. But we are impacted by it. And so our staffing levels are impacted by it. We strongly encourage all of our officers to be vaccinated, and those who've been vaccinated, we encourage them to get a booster shot. I just went and got my booster shot a couple of weeks ago. So I'm fully vaccinated. So we strongly encourage it, but we can't force people. We know we have a policy where the manager has indicated that he wants all people to be vaccinated, and we've worked to enforce that policy through HR. But there are some people who have chosen not to be vaccinated, and we're working within the, you know, within the parameters that have been established by the manager's office and HR to get them, you know, to make sure that they're complying with the rules. And then lastly, you know, we do adhere to social distancing and mask wearing, and we enforce that and require that among our people.
As far as we go, again, without getting into specific numbers, I can tell you that from the research and everything that's going, I think we pretty much mirror what we'll see in our actual community, and then throughout the unified government itself. So it's probably about the same wherever you go. It's not as high a percentage of people being vaccinated as I would like, but again, I try to lead by example myself. Me and my command staff, you know, when we go, we've all been vaccinated to my knowledge, and I put pictures up on Facebook, and every time I send emails out, I remind people about the importance of being vaccinated and following those rules. And, you know, not only that, because we deal with it in such close environments, and then with inmates that we also have to keep safe. So I told somebody the other day, I say, look, I don't have to just think about me and my family. I've got 200 family members here that work for me. And any day at the jail, I have over 300 people between the inmates, the vendors, and people that come in and out that I have to make sure we're taking the best possible care of. So we can speak to it. We can try, but again, we're not at the levels we want to be, but we're not defeated, and we're not going to stop trying to make that next step either. And let me back up to one thing, because one, I also make sure y'all know it's an open invitation to come to the sheriff's office as well. But the dispatcher in me wants to remind y'all there's dispatchers that we got to focus on too. And I want y'all to make sure you know what they do each and every day in that 911 center. So take some time. If it's just 2, 3, 4 hours, plot out some time to go and sit with those dispatchers, because they appreciate your support and they've got a very tough job too.
Great advice. All right, everyone. The evening has grown late. Appreciate, again, everybody's engagement and willingness to spend some time diving in here. I think it's given all of us strong food for thought, and also at least some issues that we can go into the budget season thinking about as well. So, Sheriff, thank you very much. Chief, and your entire staff. Everybody, please be safe. Manager Williams, thank you so much. Commissioners, have a great night.
Go Bulldogs.
All right, yeah, go Dogs one more time.
Blasphemy.